Death came without warning. One moment he was walking through the city, thinking about his friends, his college days, and the orphanage he grew up in. The next, a truck slammed into him, and everything went black. His only thought was that he wished he could have lived a little longer. He woke with a gasp, drenched in sweat, leaning against a tree in an unfamiliar forest. His heart was pounding. The air was thick and humid, and the trees around him were enormous. He looked up through the dense canopy and saw a night sky he didn't recognize. This wasn't his world. His first thought was that he had ended up in the underworld. But there was no Sanzu River, no flower fields, nothing that matched what the afterlife was supposed to look like. He questioned whether he was really dead. Then, the hunger hit him. It was overwhelming, like his body had been starving for days. He found himself chewing on leaves without thinking, and the reality sank in. If he didn't eat something soon, he was going to die all over again. Desperate, he searched the forest floor and found a large centipede. Everything in him recoiled at the sight of it, but starvation was worse. He imagined it fried and crispy, trying to trick his brain into accepting what he was about to do. Then he ate it raw. It was horrible. The taste, the texture, all of it. But he felt a tiny bit of relief, knowing he had something in his stomach. He dragged himself to a stream, drank the water, and lay there trying to process what had happened. He remembered the truck. He remembered dying. There was no denying it anymore. He looked at his reflection in the water and froze. The face staring back wasn't his. It was a child, gray-haired and malnourished, with olive skin stretched over visible bones. He realized this wasn't just an afterlife. He had been reincarnated into someone else's body. It was like one of those manga stories about being reborn in another world. Part of him still hoped it was a dream. He told himself that when he opened his eyes again, he would be in a hospital bed. But then he looked up and saw the moon. It was massive, more than twice the size of Earth's moon, hanging in the sky like proof that this world was real. He accepted it. This was his life now. He decided to focus on survival first, find food, then figure out where he was and whether there were other people around. He glanced at his reflection one more time and muttered that at least his new face wasn't bad looking. His search for food in the forest turned up nothing. No fruit, no animals, nothing he could eat. Just as frustration was setting in, he heard a voice. His heart leaped. Another person meant a chance at survival. He thought it was his lucky day. Then the voice spoke again. "Hey, human boy." It didn't sound friendly. A massive griffin dropped down in front of him. Eagle head, powerful wings, a lion's body. It told him this was its territory and ordered him to get lost. He stumbled backward, barely able to form words. The creature was terrifying. He panicked and blurted out that he had only eaten a centipede the day before and begged not to be eaten. He raised his hands, pleading, insisting he had just been reborn and didn't want to die again. He dropped to his knees and stammered that he didn't taste good, that he was mostly bones with no flesh on him. The griffin looked unimpressed. It told him it had its own standards and had no interest in eating something as scrawny as him. He felt a wave of relief mixed with confusion. The griffin scoffed and asked who he thought it was, as if being compared to a mindless predator was insulting. He took the chance and scrambled to leave, stammering a quick goodbye. But his mind was racing. What kind of world had he been thrown into? No food, an empty stomach, centipedes for meals, and now a talking griffin. He tried to run, but the griffin swooped down and blocked his path. Its eyes narrowed. It told him he had been searching for food in its territory, and that violated a long-standing pact. The creature's tone made it clear this wasn't a small offense. He dropped to his knees again and apologized, claiming he was lost and had no idea about any pact. The griffin glared at him and called him a liar. It said the pact between humans and its kind had been in place for 200 years. Every human knew about it. He kept his head low and insisted he truly didn't know. He explained that he was in an unfamiliar body and had no knowledge of this world's rules. The griffin studied him carefully, its eyes glowing red. After a long pause, it recognized what he was. It called him a lost one, someone from another world. The griffin's demeanor shifted. It admitted that if he really was a lost one, he wouldn't know the rules of this land. It even offered a quiet apology for the hostility. He told the griffin everything: his previous life, the truck, waking up in a child's body with an adult mind. The griffin listened and began to understand. It said it had encountered lost ones before, though rebirth into a new body was unusual. It confirmed that his adult mind inside a child's body was something it could sense. Then the griffin made its offer. It said it would let him go, but on one condition. It had a job for him. The protagonist listened closely, knowing he had no choice but to hear it out. The griffin led him through the forest and stopped at the entrance of a cave. This was the job it had mentioned. The protagonist stared inside, confused, with no idea what he was looking at. The griffin, clearly frustrated, told him to use his eyes. Inside the cave, a group of children huddled together. They were human, just like him. He counted 30 children in total and couldn't believe it. He asked the griffin why there were so many kids here. The griffin explained that humans had been abandoning their children because of a famine sweeping the land. 30 had been left in the forest so far. The protagonist looked down at his own thin, malnourished body and realized he had probably been abandoned too. The griffin then asked him to take care of the children until they could survive on their own. The protagonist thought it over. He had grown up in an orphanage back in his previous life, so he understood what these kids were going through. He felt a deep empathy for them. The griffin promised to provide food for 3 years, giving them time to become self-sufficient. The protagonist figured the root cause was the food shortage and started thinking about long-term solutions. The griffin stressed that it had a responsibility. It had picked up these children and saved their lives. It wasn't about to let them starve after rescuing them. It asked the protagonist plainly whether he would save someone only to abandon them afterward. The answer was obvious. The protagonist agreed. He told the griffin he would look after all of them from that point on. The griffin acknowledged his decision. He turned to face the children and introduced himself as their new leader, asking them to get along with him. The children just stared at him in silence. Then it hit him. The children started speaking, but he couldn't understand a single word. Language barriers? He hadn't considered that people from another world would speak an entirely different language. The griffin explained the problem and offered a solution. It possessed 12 divine blessings, and one of them allowed communication with other races. It could lend this blessing to the protagonist through a special ability called lending. The griffin granted him the divine blessing of language. Instantly, the words clicked. The protagonist spoke again, this time in the children's own language, and asked them to treat him well. The children's faces lit up with relief. One girl rushed forward and asked excitedly if she could call him Big Brother. He smiled. He could finally understand everything they were saying, and for the first time since arriving in this world, he felt a real connection. A boy stepped forward with a confident look on his face. He introduced himself as Ron and declared that he was the leader of the children. Another kid questioned why Ron was demanding names without giving his own first. Ron, not backing down, insisted on knowing the protagonist's name. The protagonist hesitated. He realized he needed a name that fit this world. The griffin suggested the name Almus. He repeated it to himself, liked the sound of it, and accepted it as his own. Ron asked Almus how old he was. Almus told him he was 20. Ron's eyes went wide. He said Almus looked way younger than that. The griffin stepped in and confirmed that Almus was telling the truth. Almus encouraged the rest of the children to introduce themselves. Ron, now calmer, said he was 12 years old. Soyeon introduced herself as Ron's childhood friend, speaking politely. Rosward stepped up with a serious expression and stated he was 11. Tetra and Graham, both looking curious, said they were 10. Lulu eagerly announced she was 10 as well. Ron suddenly spoke up again. He told Almus flat out that he still didn't accept him as their leader. He pointed at how young everyone was and questioned why they should follow someone they had just met. Almus understood where he was coming from. He knew his appearance wasn't exactly convincing. Soyeon stepped in and apologized for Ron, calling him a bit of an idiot. Ron fired back, and the two started bickering like they always did. Almus watched them go back and forth, and it reminded him of the orphanage from his past life. He noticed something beneath the children's cheerful attitudes. They were smiling and joking around, but he could sense the pain they were hiding underneath. Every single one of them had been abandoned by their own parents. Almus made a silent vow to protect them. He started thinking practically about their future and landed on agriculture as the first step. If they could grow their own food, they would have a real chance at survival. With that decision made, a cautious sense of hope settled over the group. With that decision made, Almus wasted no time. He gathered the children and laid out the plan. They were going to farm. The griffin had promised to provide food, but only for 3 years. After that, they were on their own. Ron questioned the idea right away, pointing out that farming was hard work and they were just kids. Almus agreed it wouldn't be easy. The surrounding jungle was dense, and they would need to clear trees before they could plant anything. He grabbed a pickaxe and started working at the roots, explaining that once the trees were gone, the soil underneath would be good enough to grow crops. But there was a bigger problem. With only children to do the work, they needed better tools. Back in the cave, Almus realized the kids had been using whatever they could find, and none of it was good enough. They needed iron farming tools. That was when Almus came up with a plan. The griffin had collected weapons over the years from people who had wandered into its territory and lost. Swords, blades, all kinds of metal just sitting in a pile, useless to a mythical beast. The griffin didn't mind handing them over, calling them smelly trash that wouldn't return to the soil. Almus figured they could trade those weapons for the tools they actually needed. He tried to lighten the mood by offering to pat one of the kids on the head, but got a cold stare in return. As they talked through the details, the group realized that carrying swords around could attract trouble. Trading them quickly was the safest move. If things got dangerous, they could always seek help from adults. That was when Tetra spoke up. The quiet 10-year-old surprised everyone with her detailed knowledge of the surrounding area. She identified the nearby kingdoms and explained the political situation, noting that iron was especially valuable to the smaller Rosel's kingdom. Almus grinned and pulled out a griffin feather. He told the group they would use it as proof that they were messengers of the griffin, which would give them the authority to negotiate. They made the journey to a nearby village. Almus and his group approached the local authority and presented their offer: 10 iron swords and 6 bronze swords in exchange for farming tools. The elder examined the weapons carefully and consulted his blacksmith, who confirmed the blades were high quality, despite some rust. Recognizing the griffin feather as legitimate, the elder agreed to the deal. They walked away with 10 hoes, 3 axes, and 8 sickles. On the way back, Rosward muttered that they should have asked for more, since the swords were clearly valuable. Almus shrugged it off and told him they could always negotiate better next time. For now, they had what they needed to start farming. He also reminded the group that they still had the griffin's support for hunting and fishing, so they weren't putting all their hopes on crops alone. Sometime later, Almus brought up an idea with the griffin. He wanted to explore the land outside the deep jungle and find a better place to settle. The griffin told him he was free to use the area beyond the deep forest however he liked. Then it mentioned something interesting. There was an abandoned village not far away. It had been empty for 30 years after an epidemic wiped out the population. The surviving villagers fled and never came back, convinced the place was cursed. Almus's eyes lit up. He asked where it was immediately. The griffin offered to fly him there. Almus climbed onto its back, and they took off above the canopy. He gripped on tight, visibly nervous about the height. At one point, he joked that he might need to pee from the fear. The griffin spotted the area below and descended toward it. Almus held on as they soared over the vast landscape, and soon the abandoned village came into view. The buildings were crumbling and overgrown, but the basic structures were still standing. They landed among the ruins, and Almus stumbled off, struggling with nausea from the flight. Once he steadied himself, he started exploring right away. He checked the remaining buildings and figured they could be repaired well enough to live in. Then he found the river. The water was crystal clear and looked perfectly drinkable. That settled it in his mind. This place had shelter, water, and open land. It was exactly what they needed. He walked out into the overgrown fields surrounding the village. The grass was thick and wild, but underneath it, the land was flat and workable. He asked the griffin about the famine that had destroyed the original village. The griffin explained that the crops had all failed at once, every single plant, which was biologically unusual. It suspected a curse rather than a natural blight, likely the work of humans from a rival group. Almus was worried. If a curse had wiped out crops before, it could happen again. But the griffin reassured him. No sorcerer would dare cast a curse anywhere near its territory. As the sun started to set, they headed back to the cave. Almus gathered the children and announced that the abandoned village would be their new home. The kids reacted with excitement. Ron hesitated for a moment, then called Almus leader for the first time, though he quickly added that he still hadn't fully accepted him. Almus smiled and addressed everyone. He acknowledged everything they had been through and promised to teach them the skills they needed to survive on their own. He explained crop rotation, how they would alternate between barley, clover, wheat, and turnips to keep the soil healthy. It was a lot to take in, but for the first time, the group felt like they had a real future ahead of them. With the crop rotation plan laid out, Almus dove into the details. He explained how cattle waste would serve as manure to keep the soil fertile across each cycle. Ron, more interested in food than farming theory, questioned why the whole system had to be so complicated. Almus kept it simple. Rotating crops meant the land would actually produce enough to feed everyone. Rosward wasn't convinced either and asked why they had to go through all that trouble, but Almus insisted the results would speak for themselves. Beyond just crops, he brought up the need for livestock. Raising cattle and goats would give them a serious advantage, not just for farming, but for nutrition too. There was some back and forth about dividing up the fields, but Almus pushed past the complaints and focused on what mattered, getting things done. He rallied the group to start repairing the abandoned buildings so they'd have a proper place to work from. Almus explained his plan to raise goats in a corner of the village. They were low maintenance and could survive on poor forage, which made them perfect for their situation. More importantly, goat milk was packed with calcium, something the children desperately needed for healthy bones. He shared what he'd learned about raising livestock from his time at the orphanage, making it clear this wasn't just theory. The group discussed the role of cattle versus goats, and Almus stressed that livestock was essential to balance their diet and keep everyone healthy. He admitted that raising animals without much experience would be tough, but the risk of calcium deficiency made it necessary. The conversation turned to how they'd actually get the livestock. Almus proposed trading their iron swords, since the Rosel Kingdom was in the middle of a famine and desperately needed weapons. Tetra, listening to all of this, quietly acknowledged that Almus was genuinely thinking about everyone's well-being. Then came Griffin. The massive creature loomed over the newly acquired goats and made it very clear what would happen if any of them tried to escape. The goats froze in terror. Almus watched and figured Griffin's method was harsh, but effective. The focus shifted to hunting. Almus showed off the bows and arrows they'd picked up alongside the goats. He stepped up to the target, drew the string, and missed. Then missed again and again. Ron couldn't help himself and mocked Almus for his terrible aim. But when Ron tried the bow himself, he was just as bad. The two of them went back and forth, neither willing to admit defeat. Then Graham picked up the bow. Quietly, almost nervously, he drew the string and hit the target. He did it again. Everyone stared. Graham explained that the trick was pulling with your back, not your arms. Almus made the call right there. Graham would be their hunter. The kid had a natural gift, and it would be foolish not to use it. Almus then pulled out a slingshot he'd made from rabbit skins. He demonstrated how it worked, spinning the cord and releasing the stone at just the right moment. The children watched, wide-eyed and impressed. He told them that with enough practice, they could hit birds out of the air, and since stones were everywhere, ammunition would never be a problem. He planned to make one for each of them. Next came foraging. Griffin walked them through the nearby plants, pointing out which ones were safe to eat and warning them that some would cause stomach aches unless they were soaked in water first. Almus asked Griffin if he ever ate anything besides meat. Griffin said he did, that he sometimes felt like eating grass. Almus found it amusing, wondering whether Griffin was more bird or more mammal. He thanked Griffin for all his help. Griffin waved it off and said he needed to head back to his territory because he was feeling sleepy. Then he spread his wings and flew off. Almus watched him go and reflected on everything Griffin had taught them. Between farming, livestock, and now foraging, they were building real survival skills. Every role mattered if these children were going to make it. Then he heard it, Rosward's voice, shouting in the distance. "Stop! You won't get anything from kidnapping me!" Almus's blood went cold. He grabbed his gear and moved, his mind racing through options. He had to find Rosward and get him out of whatever this was. He crept closer and saw the situation. A bandit, a grown man, bald and mean-looking, had Rosward pinned down. The man snarled at the boy to stay still, but Rosward wasn't backing down. He shouted that his parents had abandoned him, that there was nothing to gain from taking him. Almus, hidden nearby, pieced together the bandit's real goal. The man wasn't after Rosward specifically. He wanted their iron swords. Almus sized things up. The bandit was bigger and stronger, but he was alone, and his back was wide open. Rosward looked scared, but unharmed. Almus loaded his slingshot, steadied his breathing, and prepared to throw the first stone. Almus let the stone fly. It cracked against the bandit's skull, buying just enough time. He shouted for Rosward to run and pointed the way to safety. Rosward stumbled forward, crying out in pain, but he moved. Almus charged in to close the gap, putting himself between the bandit and the boy. He told Rosward to keep running and not look back. His voice left no room for argument. Rosward hesitated for a moment, fear written across his face, but he obeyed and retreated. The bandit turned his attention to Almus and taunted him, commenting on how cute he looked for a kid. Almus ignored the mockery and stayed focused, pressing the man to reveal what he was after. The bandit, gripping a thick wooden club with confidence, admitted he was there to steal their iron swords and trade them for food. Almus waited for an opening. The moment the bandit let his guard down, Almus struck hard and fast, catching the man completely off balance. The bandit screamed in shock and pain as Almus pressed his attack with fierce intensity. Almus followed through with lethal precision. He drove his blade into the bandit's chest and ended it. There was no hesitation in that final moment, only grim resolve. After the fight, the weight of what he had done hit him all at once. He stood there panting, trying to justify it to himself. If he had let the bandit go, the man would have come back with others. He would have taken their swords, their food, maybe even the children themselves. There had been no other choice, but knowing that did not make the feeling in his gut go away. His body gave out, and he collapsed. The other children rushed to his side, panicking. One of them asked if he was all right, voice trembling with worry. Almus tried to reassure them, but he could barely hold himself together. He ended up unconscious for 3 full days after that. When he finally woke up, the griffin was there. The ancient beast regarded him with calm understanding and told him that killing was not unique to humans. Even ants killed their own kind. It was simply the nature of living things. The griffin was trying to ease the burden on Almus's conscience, reminding him that survival sometimes demanded terrible choices. Almus admitted that even so, it was hard for social creatures to bear the act of killing one another. The griffin acknowledged this, but reminded him that his responsibility was to protect those children and eventually bring them back to where they belong. That duty came before his own discomfort. Almus then brought up something else that had been bothering him. He demonstrated his superhuman strength by snapping a thick tree branch with his bare hands, a branch as wide as an adult's arm. The griffin watched, but did not seem particularly surprised. Almus pressed the issue, worried about possessing such unnatural power in the body of a 10-year-old. The griffin suggested it was likely a blessing, a supernatural gift that transmigrators, or lost ones, sometimes received. Some had only one blessing, while others had many. Almus needed time to process all of it. Later, the group's radish crops were coming along, well despite their small numbers. Almus considered himself lucky that the radish seeds he had traded for matched the ones from his previous world. But then, worms began infesting the crops, and the children grew worried. Almus had a solution. He had found pyrethrum daisies growing nearby, and proposed distilling them into a natural pesticide. He explained the process to the group and assured them it was safe for humans in small amounts. He handed a bundle of daisies to Tetra, who looked surprised by the sudden gesture. One of the other children clarified that Almus just needed help carrying them. The group gathered around as Almus demonstrated the distillation process, with Ron and the others watching closely and asking questions. Once the liquid was ready, they poured it over the fields to kill the pests. With the bug problem handled, Almus took stock of their situation. They had enough food and shelter for now, but they still needed supplies that the forest could not provide. He suggested making a trip to the town in the Rosel Kingdom and told Tetra she should come along since she could handle a bow. Ron and Rosward were excited about being chosen as carriers for the expedition. However, Tetra turned down the invitation and chose to stay behind. With Tetra staying behind to watch over the others, Almus set out for the capital of Rosses with Ron and Rosward. When they arrived, the city was nothing like he had imagined. The streets were packed with people, and the whole place buzzed with life. Almus remarked on how beautiful and crowded it was compared to what he had expected. Hungry and eager, they made their way through the market, drawn by the aroma of food. One of the boys exclaimed about what he saw, and the group's excitement grew. As they walked, they talked about visiting shops to look at clothes and other supplies, though they needed to exchange their goods for money first. They searched for a place to trade animal teeth and herbs for coins, carefully planning out their shopping. Almus asked a local for directions, and the man pointed them to the right place. They bartered with a merchant, trying to exchange their goods for a fair price. Almus suggested throwing in more herbs to sweeten the deal, which impressed the merchant enough to offer an additional roll of cambric in exchange. Out of nowhere, a girl named Yura cut in, recognizing one of the plants as caramel grass. Almus was caught off guard as Yura introduced herself and demanded to buy his herbs. She insisted on knowing his name, offering a trade, and making it clear she had a strong interest in the valuable plants. The exchange grew more pointed as Yura spoke casually, treating Almus as an equal rather than a stranger. She explained that she intended to use the herbs to create medicines, which made Almus both curious and cautious. He questioned her plans, but told her not to bother with formalities. Ron and Rosward, eager to keep up, quickly introduced themselves to Yura as well. Yura revealed her knowledge of the surrounding region and proposed a deal for a regular supply of herbs. She asked about Almus's background, which led to a discussion about valuable trade routes near the Romano forest. Almus was wary but interested, and he weighed her offer carefully as he thought about future exchanges. Yura suggested they meet monthly to trade caramel grass for gold, laying out the terms of a potential business arrangement. As Yura prepared to leave, she reminded Almus of their agreement and complimented him on his good blessing. That remark caught him off guard. She had noticed something about him that he himself barely understood. Yura possessed a discernment blessing, which meant she could see the blessings others carried. Almus reflected on this, realizing she knew more about his abilities than she let on. In a separate scene, Almus was shown practicing the local language with Tetra, anxious about the possibility of losing his divine blessing of language. Tetra corrected his pronunciation patiently, and the two of them settled into a comfortable rhythm of teaching and learning. Tetra went on to share her knowledge of the region's geography and politics, explaining the political landscape and revealing her own mixed heritage. Despite the growing web of intrigue and alliances around them, there was a strong sense of camaraderie as Almus became more grounded in this new world's workings. Later, a conversation between Almus and Tetra turned to writing. Almus asked if Tetra could write, and she confirmed it, offering to teach him in the future. She explained that their region, Adelia, had no writing system of its own, but she was proficient in Carishian script. They agreed that once Almus finished learning Adelian, he would move on to Carishian. The topic then shifted to arithmetic. Almus asked Tetra about her math skills, and she proudly claimed she could count up to 10,000 and handle 2-digit addition and subtraction. Almus was impressed and wondered whether the other children shared her ability. He promised to reveal more the next day. The following day, Almus stood before the group and explained the benefits of learning arithmetic. One of the children questioned its usefulness, not seeing the point. Almus told Ron and Rosward that understanding calculations was essential for trade, warning them that without it, merchants could easily cheat them. He gave an example of a time they had been swindled. That struck a nerve, and the children accepted the importance of the lesson. Almus challenged Tetra to count from 1 to 10, but noticed she skipped 0. He used the opportunity to introduce the concept of 0, which was completely foreign to everyone. He explained that it represented nothing, and the narrative made it clear that this world had never encountered the idea. Despite the difficulty, Almus managed to teach the children Arabic numerals. 0 was the hardest concept for them to grasp, even for Tetra, who could already count to 10,000. A month passed, and Tetra's understanding had advanced far beyond her peers. She confidently took on a leadership role, helping to instruct the others in arithmetic. Almus acknowledged her hard work and rewarded her with private lessons focused on multiplication. He felt she had earned this special attention, especially since she had been the one teaching him Adelian and Carishian in return. During a quieter moment, Almus and Tetra talked about the value of education. She asked whether everyone in his homeland could do calculations, and he told her that her skills would rival students much younger than her back where he came from. Reflecting on his old world system, he shared that education was compulsory there, describing it as a citizen's right and a nation's responsibility. Tetra then asked when he would fully master the local language, and Almus laughed to himself, thinking about how difficult it would be without relying on his language blessing. As the days passed, Almus settled into a rhythm of studying the local language and teaching the children arithmetic, but he had not forgotten about Yura. When the time came for their next meeting, he set out to find her, leaving Ron and Rosward behind at the settlement. Yura greeted him warmly, commenting on how long it had been and asking if he had brought what she requested. Almus handed over a bundle of caramel grass, just as he had promised. She asked about Ron and Rosward, but Almus explained that the two had stayed home. Yura then told him she had something important to discuss. She brought up the topic of blessings and revealed that she already knew about his. Almus was caught off guard. During their first encounter, Yura had hinted at her discernment blessing, but now she laid it out plainly. The ability allowed her to see the blessings others carried. She described Almus's blessing as having been granted by fairies, though Almus remained skeptical about whether fairies even existed. Yura identified his blessing as the blessing of the king, a power that enhanced his abilities the more people recognized him as a leader. Almus was visibly stunned. He began to wonder whether the progress he had made so far was tied to the children looking up to him. The thought unsettled him, but Yura simply acknowledged his reaction and moved on. Almus then asked how she even knew where he lived. Yura revealed another one of her abilities, the Blessing of Heaven's Eye, which allowed her to observe things from a great distance. She had spotted Almus and the others entering the forest and figured out their location from there. Feeling it was safe enough, Almus admitted that there was no actual curse from the griffin protecting them. He decided to trust Yura with that secret, but kept his reincarnation to himself. Yura promised she would not tell anyone. She pieced together that Almus and the children were abandoned orphans. Almus thanked her for agreeing to keep their secret. The mood lightened after that, and Yura invited him to come shopping with her. Almus was surprised by just how much she needed to buy. She explained that the herbs and rocks were all for curse magic practice. Almus was curious, and Yura clarified that curse techniques covered far more than just cursing people. She then shifted to a more serious topic, hinting that the famine that had devastated the region was no natural disaster. It had been orchestrated by humans, likely an entire nation working together. Yura's expression hardened as she declared she would show no mercy to whoever was behind a large-scale curse like that. Almus, wanting to change the subject, casually invited her to visit their settlement sometime. Yura seemed interested, but said she would need need to ask her father first. When Almus offered to pay her for all the help, she brushed it off. They were friends, and friends did not charge each other. The exchange ended on a warm note, with both of them planning to meet again. Almus was still loaded down with all of Yura's shopping bags. When she teased him about whether they were really friends, he shot back that no one would carry this much for someone who was not a friend. Yura looked surprised for a moment, then smiled. The conversation turned to curse magic, and Almus learned that he was probably not suited for it. Yura explained that 90% of curse users were female, and that she could tell who had the talent and who did not. Almus laughed it off, shifting the heavy bags on his back with ease. His physical strength made the load feel like nothing. As they walked, Almus asked where Yura actually lived, but she deflected the question. They arrived at a new area, and Yura called out for someone named Bolton. A man appeared with a startled expression, clearly not expecting visitors. The smell of alcohol hit Almus immediately, and he recoiled. Bolton reeked of it. Yura introduced Bolton as her bodyguard, though she referred to him dismissively. Bolton joked that he was not exactly well liked. Yura told Almus to hand the shopping bags over to Bolton, and Almus complied. Bolton stared in disbelief at how much a kid had been carrying. The group shared a laugh about why Yura had not brought Bolton along in the first place, and the answer was obvious: the smell. They said their goodbyes, with Yura waving cheerfully and Almus heading back home. Back at the settlement, Almus gathered the children and explained that they needed to start thinking beyond food. Their farming was stable enough that they no longer had to worry about starving, but essentials like clothes and salt were expensive and hard to come by. He laid out a plan. They were going to make pottery and trade it for what they needed, but first they had to build a kiln. He pointed out a nearby slope that would work for the construction. The real challenge was labor, he admitted, since they would need to dig and chop down trees. But Almus was not about to let that stop them. He told the group to grab their tools and get to work. The children rallied behind him, and together they set out to build the kiln. The idea had come from a conversation with Yura. When Almus asked her what could be traded for salt or clothing, she pointed him toward pottery, specifically the kind from Kryuu. Those pieces were durable, had a unique color, and were popular even among royals. The local pottery, by comparison, was reddish and fragile from open-air firing. That gap was exactly the opportunity Almus needed. If he could build a sealed kiln and control the oxygen inside, he could fire something far stronger. He had a technique in mind for producing black glazed pottery, and now, with the children rallied and ready to work, it was time to make it happen. Almus led by example, chopping wood at an impressive speed. Tetra watched him with curiosity, amazed at his strength, which he owed to the griffin's blessing. He directed the group to dig out clay for the kiln, stressing that making it airtight was the key to getting the firing process right. The whole group threw themselves into building the kiln. Despite having no real experience, Almus felt the result turned out surprisingly well. Once the kiln was done, the children started shaping clay into pots and bowls. Some of them took it seriously, while others treated it more like play. Ron and Rosward ended up in a clay fight, flinging mud at each other until Soyen scolded them for wasting materials. Almus reminded the kids that if their pottery broke, it was on them. He wanted them to learn through trial and error. When the first batch of pottery came out of the kiln, everyone gathered around. The pot had fired into a beautiful gray color, and the group admired it with genuine pride. For a bunch of kids working with rough tools and no proper training, it was a real achievement. With the pottery handled, Almus turned his attention to the next problem: winter fuel. He explained the process of making charcoal, showing the children how to stack wood logs tightly and cover the gaps with leaves to control the airflow. He broke down how oxygen played a role in combustion, turning the lesson into a practical demonstration of the chemistry behind it. The children paid close attention as he walked them through each step, reinforcing his role as both their leader and teacher. As the work wrapped up, Almus reflected on the whole process. He had some familiarity with these methods from his past life, but doing it all without modern tools was another matter entirely. Still, the village was better prepared for winter now, and there was a growing sense that their combined effort was building something real. Winter passed, and with the arrival of a new year came unexpected company. The griffin showed up with a group of new children, explaining that they had been wandering through its forest. After taking them in, the village's population jumped by 10. Almus asked Tetra about the tax system to understand why so many children were being abandoned. She explained the 4 types of taxes: land, population, labor service, and military conscription. The burden depended on the country's power and each family's circumstances. The new children revealed they came from the Rosel Kingdom, which was known for having relatively lower taxes. Tetra speculated that even so, their parents might have abandoned them to avoid the financial strain. One of the children asked Almus where he came from. That question stirred something deeper, and the conversation shifted to the internal conflicts among the Ash family, a powerful, noble house. Almus and Tetra were both surprised by the revelations of betrayal and crushing taxes tied to that family's actions. The discussion hit Tetra harder than anyone expected. She suddenly ran off, visibly upset. Almus followed her and found her in tears. He stayed with her and offered what comfort he could, understanding that the talk of noble families and parental betrayal had struck a personal nerve. After she had calmed down, Almus stepped away to think about what had just happened. It was rare to see Tetra cry. She was usually the composed one, the quiet thinker who held everything together. Whatever connection she had to those events ran deep. The other children came up to Almus and asked about Tetra's state. He told them it was normal to feel that way, that missing parents and feeling hurt by them was something any of them might go through. He told the kids to keep working and to act normally when Tetra came back, so she wouldn't feel embarrassed. Then, he took a quiet moment to think about the newcomers, their future, and what his next move should be. With more children to feed and the weight of everything that had happened still fresh in his mind, Almus knew he needed to think bigger. He had been considering meeting Yura's father for a while now, and he finally asked her if she would let him. Yura told him that her father was actually interested in meeting her friends, though she seemed a little flustered about the whole thing. She hesitated for a moment, but eventually agreed. As they made their way into the Rosel Kingdom, Almus thought about the strategic benefits of forming a connection with someone influential. The kingdom was in a state of political chaos, and he knew that relying solely on Griffin's protection had its limits. But as they passed through an area lined with grand houses, something felt off. He suddenly realized they were heading straight toward the royal palace. He could not believe it. That was when Yura's father made his entrance, and everything clicked into place. The man carried himself with unmistakable authority, thanking Almus for being friends with his daughter. Almus had walked straight into a meeting with the king of Rosel without knowing it. He was completely caught off guard and told Yura he wished she had mentioned this earlier. She sheepishly admitted that she had simply forgotten to tell him her father was the king. The king welcomed Almus warmly, mentioning that Yura had never brought a friend home before. He explained that her dedication to studying magic had left her rather isolated. This surprised Almus, who had always assumed Yura had plenty of friends. It suddenly became clear that her awkwardness in the past had not been an act at all. The king then turned the conversation to more serious matters. He probed Almus about his intentions, asking whether he was seeking refuge or protection. Almus made it clear that he was not there for that. The discussion shifted to the issue of children being abandoned in the forest and the reality of the hardships people faced in the kingdom. The king expressed his appreciation for what Almus had been doing, taking care of those abandoned children. He said it was his duty as king to protect his people, and he offered Almus 5 years of tax exemption on any newly developed land. Almus accepted the offer. Both of them seemed relieved, and there was a sense of mutual understanding about working together going forward. Before they parted, the king asked Almus to formally introduce his village and to keep being friends with Yura. The conversation then took a lighter turn when a math problem about dividing grain came up. Yura struggled badly with division, much to her embarrassment. Almus offered to help tutor her, which hinted at their growing bond. A humorous exchange about payment for the lessons followed, with Yura protesting as the scene wound down with a warm, familial moment between the king and his brother. After Almus left, the king proposed letting the boy serve as a personal tutor for Yura. His brother, standing beside him with a thoughtful expression, agreed that it was a good idea since Almus was already Yura's friend. The king, with a somewhat cunning look, noted that having his daughter learn from a friend would be far more effective than any formal arrangement. His brother reacted with surprise when the king told him he did not need to hide his true intentions. The real plan was to invest in Almus, the boy who led a group of children under the protection of a griffin. It was a strategic move. The scene shifted to show the griffin itself, a majestic beast surrounded by other creatures, watching over the children in its territory. The king's brother admired his siblings' foresight, admitting that staying close to Almus could pay off in the long run. He stressed that they needed to properly assess the boy's abilities and character before committing further. The mood turned somber. The king reflected on his failure to protect Lagu Ash and the weight of losing a powerful ally, pressed heavily on him. His expression showed regret and deep stress. His brother discussed the political fallout, warning that the grand families were losing faith in their leadership. Then came an even more alarming issue. King Hermi was moving troops into their territory. The king looked distressed, sitting beside a crying child, as he confessed his worry about having no male heir. But then Yura appeared, cheerfully playing with the child, and the mood lightened. The king smiled and said he was content with his daughter. The emotional moment left him teary-eyed as he spoke about personal losses and his wish for Yura to be happy. He gazed gently at a picture of her, but the problems were far from over. Reports of trouble from across the kingdom kept coming in, and someone suggested marrying Yura off to a suitable candidate to strengthen alliances. The king sneezed suddenly, drawing concerned looks and briefly breaking the tension. As the scene drew to a close, the king stood overlooking his kingdom. He sensed that the nation was heading toward decline, but he held on to one sliver of hope. The boy connected to the griffin. With a determined look, he resolved to find a way forward, believing that something miraculous might yet come from that unlikely alliance and change the fate of the entire peninsula. While the king placed his hopes on the boy connected to the griffin, back at the village, Almus was dealing with something much closer to home. He had noticed that Tetra had been acting strangely lately, and it was starting to bother him. She was usually quiet and reserved, but something felt different this time. It wasn't just him either. The other kids in the village had started picking up on it too. He decided to approach her directly. He found Tetra carrying a basket and told her that if something was on her mind, she could talk to him about it. He promised she didn't have to share anything she wasn't comfortable with. After some hesitation, Tetra finally opened up. She revealed that her full name was Tetra Ash, and that the reason she had been so troubled was because she had heard news that the Ash family had been attacked. Almus admitted he had suspected she might be connected to them, but he reassured her that it didn't change anything. She was still the same Tetra to all of them. Tetra thanked him, and for a moment, she seemed a little lighter, but then her expression darkened again. She confessed that she could sense her parents were dead. Even so, she held on to a small hope that maybe they were just being held captive somewhere. She pointed the blame at a man named Robert Firm, her father's closest subordinate. Despite being trusted and favored, he had betrayed them. When Almus asked if she wanted revenge, Tetra hesitated. She was angry, but she also didn't want to leave the village behind. Almus told her firmly that no one was going to abandon her. He urged her not to try to handle things on her own, reminding her how important she was to him and to everyone. He told her that with her intelligence, she was more than capable of helping protect the entire village. Tetra was quiet for a moment, reflecting on everything between them. Something shifted in her, and she seemed ready to say what she had been holding back. But just as she was about to confess her feelings, another kid came running over, excited about something in the garden. The kid immediately assumed that Tetra and Almus were secretly dating. Almus quickly tried to clear up the misunderstanding. Still, he noticed that the interruption seemed to snap Tetra back to her usual self, and a small part of him was relieved to see it. Another year and several months had passed, and Almus was now 14 years old. He had been working hard on his language skills, becoming increasingly proficient in speaking Adelina. He even considered returning the divine blessing of language to Griffin, now that he could manage on his own. When he met up with Tetra to practice his reading and writing, she noted how much he had improved, though she also pointed out a potential problem ahead. At the tax bureau, Almus listed the people he was paying taxes for: himself, Ron, and Soyeon. That came to 3 people total. He discussed the amount with an agent and found it manageable for now, though he knew the taxes would only increase as they all got older. The conversation took a lighter turn when Griffin jokingly suggested that Almus could pay him in alcohol instead. Back at the village, Almus and the others talked about the importance of becoming self-sufficient. The wheat harvest was their immediate priority. Tetra suggested they start by dealing with the wheat they had already harvested, and Almus agreed, asking what their next steps should be. Graham reminded everyone how painful the last harvest had been, back when they had to pick the grains out by hand. That was when Almus introduced a new tool he had built, a threshing comb. He explained that it was designed to separate the wheat from the stalks far more efficiently. The group tried it out and couldn't believe how much easier it was compared to their old methods. The next challenge was removing the husks from the grain, which was always a tedious job. Almus had managed to get a stone mortar, but he admitted that the real work was still in sorting the husks from the clean seeds. He demonstrated a winnowing process using a new machine he had put together, which blew the lighter husks away from the heavier grain. Later, Almus spent some time with Yura. Their conversation turned to math, with Yura expressing gratitude that he had been teaching her. There was a playful awkwardness between them, as Yura wondered aloud how long he planned to keep it up. Almus told her not to worry about it, and that learning was something that never really stopped. The chapter ended on a humorous note when a small accident left both Almus and Yura flustered and embarrassed. They traded playful jabs about his role as her teacher, with Almus hinting that she shouldn't expect it to last forever. It seemed that Almus's comments about not teaching Yura forever had reached the wrong ears. He found himself sitting across from none other than King Rosel, Yura's father, who wasted no time questioning him about his desire to stop tutoring her. The king pointed out that Yura would be lonely if Almus stepped away. Almus, looking thoughtful, wondered how long he was really expected to keep going. Rosel suggested there was no set duration and that Almus should simply teach until he had nothing left to offer. Rosel then admitted he was worried about losing his shogi opponent if Almus stopped visiting. Almus smiled and held up one of the pieces, revealing that he had crafted the shogi board himself. He figured the game could be a profitable venture in a land that lacked entertainment. As he laid out his idea, Tetra chimed in, noting that shogi could be good for selling, but warning about replication problems, since there was no concept of patents in their world. Almus realized that anyone could just copy his board. Tetra explained that he could not stop replicas unless the production method itself was unique, which forced him to rethink his approach. Instead of chasing profit, Almus decided to aim for prestige as the inventor of shogi and considered using that reputation to impress King Rosel. Thinking about the future, Almus mentioned that once the children in the village grew independent, he might need a new path. Rosel offered him a seat, clearly intrigued by what Almus had to say. As they talked, Almus realized something. Yura had no friends besides him. Rosel explained that her isolation came from disputes with the families she had once been close to. Because of her royal status, commoner girls kept their distance, leaving Yura with only Almus for company. The conversation turned to Yura herself. Rosel spoke about her humility, despite her status and her rare talent for magic. He showed Almus an image of a chief priestess, explaining that Yura was expected to become one because of her extraordinary abilities. He reassured Almus that everyone recognized her potential, especially since she was his only daughter. Rosel then brought up the matter of Yura's future husband, noting that whoever married her would become the next king. He warned that ambitious men might try to use that to their advantage. Almus suggested hiding Yura's identity so she could make real friends, though he admitted that security concerns made it difficult. Almus proposed his village as a safe place for Yura to spend time. Rosel called it a brilliant idea, but someone raised concerns about the danger of the griffin forest along the way. Rosel waved it off, revealing he had already ensured safety by using soul riding, a technique where a magician could scout ahead by projecting their consciousness into an animal. Despite some initial worry, the safety of the arrangement was confirmed. The real reason behind Yura's regular visits to the forest was then revealed. It was a strategic move to build goodwill with the griffin. Rosel admitted his own naivety, but said he genuinely liked Almus, hinting at possible alliances in the future. Reflecting on Almus's abilities, Rosel marveled at the young man's knowledge of numbers and languages. He suggested that if Almus were ever interested, he could become a vassal or even acquire land of his own. The two shared a laugh, both acknowledging what Almus was capable of and what might lie ahead. Back at the village, Yura made her entrance with full energy. She introduced herself to the villagers with a bright smile, announcing that Almus always took care of her. She raised her hand and waved enthusiastically, while the villagers watched with a mix of curiosity and admiration. Almus stood nearby, observing the scene. Yura's visit marked the first time someone from outside had officially come to the village, and he understood the weight of the moment. He stayed calm, but kept a close eye on everything. He explained to the group that Yura already knew Ron and Rosward, which helped ease the tension. Still, a brief silence hung in the air as the villagers sized her up. Then, one of them asked the obvious question about Yura's relationship with Almus. Her expression shifted, sensing the weight behind the inquiry. Without warning, Yura clung to Almus and declared that they were lovers. The villagers' faces twisted with shock and disbelief. One of them even commented on how lucky Almus was to be with someone so beautiful. Almus, completely caught off guard, turned red and told her to cut it out with the jokes. Yura just looked pleased with herself. She gazed at him with a teasing expression and admitted she was only playing around, telling him not to say weird things. But then she leaned in and asked if he would actually mind if it were real, adding a layer of flirtation that left him speechless. The villagers watched the whole thing unfold, and so did Tetra. Her expression darkened immediately. Almus could feel the tension radiating off her as Yura walked away, leaving him flustered. Tetra's angry face filled his vision, and he winced. "It hurts. Don't get so mad, Tetra," he muttered, caught right in the middle of their rivalry. Tetra was still fuming after Yura's little stunt, and Almus could barely get a word in before she stomped on his foot again. Someone nearby laughed and said it was hard being popular, which only made Tetra more irritated. Before things could escalate, a tall, rugged man stepped forward and introduced himself as Bolton Pompey. He was Yura's guard, and Almus was surprised to see that the entire security detail was just him. He had expected more people protecting Yura, given her importance. Bolton just shrugged it off. Almus pointed out that the small escort actually showed how much the King of Rosses trusted Bolton. He suggested that the king must have considered Bolton skilled enough to protect his daughter all by himself. Bolton waved away the flattery and called himself nothing more than an alcoholic. He joked that it would actually be more convenient for Almus if he neglected his duties. Almus insisted that wasn't true at all and said it would be bad if the king found out Bolton was slacking. Tetra, meanwhile, still looked upset with her cheeks puffed in frustration. Bolton then revealed something he had been hiding. He told Almus that Tetra was actually a close acquaintance of the King of Rosses, connected to the Lagos Ash royal family. If the king found out about her, he would surely come to take her back. People around them murmured about the possibility of a political marriage, but Tetra herself wanted nothing to do with that. Almus worried about who would teach him Parisian if Tetra left. Still, Bolton noted that it didn't matter at the moment since he was too drunk to care. The conversation shifted to the topic of social debuts. According to Tetra, the age for a noble's societal introduction was 12. Bolton shouldn't have known Tetra when she was 10 years old, so the secret was safe for now. Bolton then turned to Yura and asked what he should call her. She smiled and told him that just Yura was fine. He decided he would drop the honorifics too. Bolton then asked Almus what he was going to do with Yura, and Almus had an idea. He suggested teaching the people in the village how to use curse magic. He wanted to give the village various kinds of independence, and having curse users among them would be a huge advantage. Yura, who preferred playing with poisonous plants and flowers over socializing with kids her age, could actually teach the villagers. Almus admitted he could teach them math, but curse magic was impossible for him. Some of the girls in the village could potentially become curse magicians. Even for the males who were unsuited for curse magic, it would still be helpful to at least learn ways to counter curses. Beyond the practical benefits, teaching would also help deepen the bonds of friendship for Yura herself. Bolton told Almus there was no need to speak so formally to him. He said he was a guard, but also a commoner, and Almus didn't have to be polite. Almus agreed and relaxed. Bolton then mentioned that Almus had done well for himself and could aim even higher. He explained that the King of Rosses didn't care about a person's status. If someone had the skills, they would be promoted. He told Almus that they would probably try to recruit him when he got older. At the very least, he could become a government official, and if he played it right, he might even be given territory. Almus was currently 14, and the minimum age was 17, so he still had time. Bolton admitted the country was in an unstable state and needed help from outsiders, so the king was expecting a lot from Almus. Almus thought about it. Becoming a government official might not be so bad, but only after the people of the village became independent. He glanced over at the girls who were taking curse magic lessons and asked Bolton if they were really understanding the material. Bolton said they were keeping up, and that the top students were even better than Yura at the lessons. He asked if Almus was also teaching those kids math. Almus confirmed he was teaching everyone. On top of that, one of them was giving reading and writing lessons, and another could speak Parisian. Bolton was stunned. He couldn't believe it. So many kids that could read, write, and do math, and curse magic on top of all that. He asked if Ron and the others could also hope to become bureaucrats. Almus said that would be up to the king, but he hoped so. Bolton then said he should get to work too. Almus realized that Bolton wasn't just here to guard Yura, he was also here to observe the village. Bolton asked whether it was true that they didn't have to leave fields fallow. Almus explained that dividing the fields into sections through crop rotation meant the yield per crop decreased slightly, but the land never needed to rest. He then showed Bolton a strange-looking farming tool and explained it was a winnowing machine called a senbakoki. When Bolton asked about reporting all of this to the king, Almus told him to say it was his idea. Bolton was overwhelmed. Crop rotation, the senbakoki, a winnowing tool, and so much more. He said the village was like a treasure box full of ideas and asked if Almus had really thought up all of it. Almus got embarrassed and told him to stop. Bolton asked if he could bring the winnower back with him, and Almus agreed, recommending that the teeth be made out of metal for better results. He even offered to draw up the designs on lambskin parchment if Bolton wanted to disassemble it and see how it worked. Bolton then noticed a strong smell and learned that the village was also producing its own pottery and charcoal. Almus held up a chrysanthemum and explained it was a natural insecticide used to repel harmful bugs. Bolton was amazed, saying the knowledge could be applied immediately. Bolton paused and admitted that this was a lot more than he had expected to find. He said he was neither a warrior nor a civil official, so he didn't know the true worth of all this knowledge, but he could tell it was unmistakably beneficial to the country. Almus quietly reflected that all of these innovations were souvenirs from his previous life. Bolton grasped Almus's hand with both of his own and thanked him sincerely. He said these things were beneficial to the entire country and asked Almus to help promote him to the king. He looked up and murmured that they had not been forsaken by the gods yet. Tetra's voice cut through the moment. She yelled at Bolton, calling him a drunkard and telling him to drown in alcohol. Bolton just laughed and asked how much she loved alcohol to keep bringing it up. Tetra then called out to Almus, telling him to leave that drunkard and come over to her. Almus smiled and told Bolton it seemed like the princess was calling, so Prince Charming would have to go. He said his goodbye to Bolton and headed off toward Tetra, leaving the chapter on a lighthearted note. It wasn't long before Almus found himself standing in King Rose's city. Bolton's report about the village had clearly made an impression because the king wanted to see Almus in person. Rose started the conversation casually, asking how Yura was doing and whether she had made any friends. Almus told him she was enjoying herself, but small talk didn't last long. Roses brought up the report on rotary agriculture and asked whether it actually worked. Almus explained that the method was theoretically proven, drawing on knowledge from his past life about crop rotation techniques, but he admitted the challenge of not having completed a full 4-year cycle yet. He added that scaling it up would require more land and more manpower. Rose showed interest in introducing the method to his own kingdom, but Almus pointed out that it would require establishing clear land ownership first. A discussion followed about whether such a reform was even politically possible. Almus noted that in this country, self-farming was directly tied to a soldier's strength, and changing that system would not be easy. Rose acknowledged the difficulty, admitting that the powerful families in his kingdom held too much influence. Almus observed the social divide clearly. Those wealthy enough to own horses formed the cavalry, while the poor became light infantry or spearmen. The gap in military power reflected the gap in wealth. The conversation took a lighter turn when Almus asked for farming horses as his reward. Rose granted it, giving him 2 horses and a year's worth of fodder. As Almus prepared to leave, Rose complimented his strategic mind, comparing him to a genius blessed by the griffin. They shared a light-hearted exchange over a game of shogi, showing the mutual respect between them, despite the difference in their positions. The discussion then turned to the kingdom's fragile political structure. Almus pointed out serious problems with how aristocratic families managed their territories, warning that the web of blood relations and territorial allegiances made the nation unstable. One powerful family turning against the crown could spark a chain reaction across the entire kingdom. Rose reacted with surprise at the bluntness of the critique, but ultimately agreed with Almus's assessment. He admitted that the intermarriage between noble families had created dangerous entanglements, and that military and financial power was too dispersed among them. Rose reassured Almus that he had taken some measures against potential unrest, but the underlying problem remained. Over food and drink, Roses asked Almus directly for suggestions on how to improve the kingdom's political system. Almus thought carefully before answering. He proposed centralization, stripping power from the aristocratic families and concentrating authority under the king. He drew on knowledge from his past life, referencing how similar shifts had transformed entire nations from fragmented aristocracies into centralized states. Rose and those present were visibly surprised by the depth of his insight. Almus went further, explaining that true centralization required a clear separation between royalty and everyone else. He suggested that the king could establish a divine narrative, claiming descent from the gods to reinforce his authority above the nobles. He admitted he was not familiar enough with this world's religious traditions to know how to do it, but the principle was sound. Rose listened with sharp, piercing eyes. He hinted that he already had his own plan for centralization, but had been hesitant to use it. There was a tension in the air, as both men understood the enormous difficulty of executing such reforms. Rose compared it to a dish where the ingredients spoil before you can finish cooking. The window of opportunity was closing. Then, without warning, Rose clutched his chest and coughed up blood. Almus rushed to his side, alarmed. Rosel waved him off, insisting he was fine, but it was clear he was suffering. Almus learned that this illness had plagued the king for a decade, and even the most skilled curse users in the kingdom had been unable to cure him. The situation was grim. No amount of curse power could fix what was wrong. Despite his weakened state, Rosel straightened himself and looked Almus in the eye. He told Almus there was a task he needed him to complete before the king's time ran out. Almus was caught off guard by the weight of the request, but he met it with determination. He promised to do his best. The scene closed with a heavy sense of urgency. Rosel was running out of time, and the future of the kingdom now rested partly on Almus's shoulders. With Rosel's request still weighing on his mind, Almus made the journey back to the village. But the moment he came into view, any heaviness gave way to excitement. A girl spotted him first and shouted that Almus had returned, and the whole village buzzed with curiosity. Everyone speculated about what amazing things he had brought back from King Rosel's kingdom. As the villagers rushed over, Almus arrived, leading 2 horses, and the crowd greeted him warmly. One of them mentioned it was their first time seeing a horse up close. A cautious villager with a serious look told the others to calm down. Almus proudly introduced the horses, and a young boy said he was amazed since he had never touched one before. The attention then shifted to a girl sitting on horseback, and a villager asked Almus who she was. He introduced her as Rhea, a slave he had received. The villager was shocked and asked why she was a slave. Almus thought back to his conversation with King Rosel, where they had discussed the village's lack of experience with horses. Rosel had offered a slave to help, and that was how Rhea came to join them. While riding back, Almus had made plans to practice horse riding. He briefly recalled how a royal advisor named Raymond had helped arrange everything. Back in the village, Almus learned that Rhea spoke a different language, one that most villagers did not understand. He told everyone he wanted them to treat Rhea as one of their own, and hoped she would fit in well. The village was in high spirits. A cheerful girl asked Almus if he had brought any souvenirs. He jokingly suggested they take some dried meat from the horses' bags and offered it with a grin. Another villager teased Almus about his awkwardness with romance, and the group laughed about the whole thing. Titora, looking surprised, mentioned that the goats had eaten most of the weeds in the wasteland. Almus was impressed and suggested they use the new horses to expand their farmland. Now that he was back, Almus felt optimistic and full of energy. He wanted to widen the fields threefold. He praised the growth of the other villagers and singled out those with talent in magic and curses. His positive attitude was infectious, and everyone felt encouraged. In the final moment, Titora noticed the equipment the horses were carrying. Almus explained that he had received it along with the horses, including a plow and a harrow needed for farming. Everyone was impressed by how well prepared he was, and they got ready to begin their agricultural work. The villagers were stunned by the speed of a horse pulling a plow. One of them said the horsepower was far beyond what they could manage by hand. Another struggled to keep up, shouting that it hurt just to hold on. Watching from the side, a woman suggested they should all learn to ride, given how effective the horse was. Meanwhile, someone brought up the idea of growing cannabis, which sparked curiosity from the others. The conversation turned to cannabis itself. One person explained that while it was often thought of as a narcotic, in their world it was mainly used as a painkiller. Cannabis grew fast, and its seeds were packed with nutrition, which made it appealing for cultivation. They also talked about using its fibers, which fit the village's need to develop new products, now that tribute payments to King Firm were eating into their resources. The discussion then shifted to how they could record information. The group reviewed different materials like papyrus, sheepskin, and wooden planks. Each had its problems. Papyrus split easily, sheepskin was durable but attracted insects, and wood was too limited for long writing. They realized that making paper would be far superior to any of these options. Someone raised the question of whether there was even demand for paper, since most villagers could not write. They concluded that the demand would come from leaders and history recorders, and they considered the possibility of developing a trade around paper craftsmanship. The paper-making process began. They submerged tree bark and hemp in water, creating a small pool near the riverbank. The materials were softened to remove impurities. They introduced lye to break down the fibers, and someone joked that the mixture looked like stew, which got a laugh from the group. The work continued with cooling, washing, and soaking the materials overnight. The next steps involved pounding everything down and creating starch from wheat flour, which one of them eagerly claimed for themselves. They mixed the starch glue with the pulp to form the paper mixture. A mold they called a paper tray was used to drain the water and shape the sheets for drying. They repeated the process several times to get thinner and smoother results. When the first batch was done, the group examined it closely. There was some dust and the sheets were a bit thin, but everyone was satisfied with what they had made. A sense of real accomplishment filled the air. The group gathered excitedly around a table to examine the finished paper. One of them could barely contain their excitement and shouted that it was actual paper. The others crowded in to get a closer look. Someone lifted the sheet and pointed out how much better it was than anything else they had. It was lighter than sheepskin, softer than papyrus, and easier to write on than wooden planks. They held it up proudly for everyone to see. Almus stood to the side with a sly grin, quietly thinking to himself. This was the first paper ever made in this world, and he realized he could go down in history for it. He thought about how paper had originally been invented in China long ago, and here he was, bringing that knowledge to a new world. One of the villagers, bursting with energy, immediately suggested they go sell it to King Rosel. They clutched the paper with excitement, already imagining the commercial possibilities. Another villager stared at the sheet with wide eyes, realizing the full potential. This could be mass-produced and sold. The group was filled with entrepreneurial drive, already thinking ahead to what this invention could mean for the village's future. With the village buzzing over their first batch of paper and everyone eager to turn it into a real business, Almus wasted no time. He brought the paper directly to King Rosel, presenting it as a trade product his village had crafted from scratch. The king inspected it closely and was genuinely impressed, declaring that he would buy every sheet they could make. However, he insisted on eventually learning the production method himself. Almus assured him they could maintain steady transactions for the next 3 years, and the king stressed the importance of improving the paper's quality, hoping to turn it into a national industry. In exchange, Almus agreed not to sell the paper elsewhere. For Almus, this meant a stable source of income for the village, and he was grateful for the king's trust. A year passed, and the village had grown enough to sustain itself. Almus reflected on how far they had come, realizing that the griffin's direct support was no longer necessary. He walked through the forest and met the griffin, who praised him for raising every one of the children without a single loss. Almus humbly admitted he had not done it alone, crediting the support of King Rosel and his companions. The griffin asked whether Almus still needed the divine protection of language. Almus waved it off, saying he was fine now, though he still relied on it to communicate with certain people. One of his allies was teased for studying the local language so passionately, with the others joking it was motivated by a love interest. Before they parted, the griffin made one final request, that Almus bring alcohol regularly as a token of gratitude. With that, their formal agreement came to an end. Almus stepped out of the forest and was greeted by Tetra, who asked about the griffin. He passed along the griffin's regards and its request for fruit wine. Standing there, Almus felt a quiet sense of pride in everything the village had achieved and its newfound independence. Almus stood at a high point overlooking the village and took in the view. The place that had once been a deserted patch of land now showed real signs of life and development. He acknowledged that everyone had worked hard to get to this point. Feeling proud of how far they had come, he told Tetra to gather the group because he had something important to announce. Once everyone was assembled, Almus addressed them. He mentioned that Yura had informed him the kingdom of Rosel had enjoyed a plentiful harvest that year, and he had confirmed it with his own eyes. The group listened, and someone questioned why he was bringing this up, sensing there was more to it. Almus then suggested that those who had originally been born in Rosel could return to their families if they wished, since the improved harvest meant their parents could support them again. As he laid out the possibility, he admitted there would be challenges. If skilled members left, the village would feel the loss. One of the children stepped forward and argued against going back, saying that even though their parents had abandoned them once, they feared being unwanted or used again. A flashback showed the deep scars of abandonment some of the children still carried. They had once idealized their parents, but reality had taught them otherwise. Almus watched this unfold and recognized something personal in it, a reflection of his own complicated feelings about family and the ideals he had projected onto others. Back in the present, the group made their feelings clear. One by one, they expressed their trust and affection for Almus, insisting they wanted to stay together. They said the bond they had formed as a group, even though many of them were not related by blood, was stronger than anything waiting for them back in Rosel. One person raised their hand to signal they were staying, and the rest followed, each one choosing Almus and the village over their old lives. Almus stood there, visibly moved. He thought back to the early days when the children had cried every night for their parents. Now those same children were choosing to remain by his side. The contrast between that past longing and this present loyalty hit him hard, and it was clear just how much his leadership had meant to all of them. Tetra looked at Almus with a kind and encouraging expression and told him that everyone in the village loved him. Almus met her eyes with a warm smile and said her name softly. Then, With renewed determination, he declared that he understood and would continue to serve as the village's leader. He raised his fist and committed to the role with full energy. Someone in the group asked with a grin whether he was crying, and Almus denied it immediately, insisting he would never cry, though his face said otherwise. One of the others pointed out that the whole display had seemed a little too coordinated, almost like it had been rehearsed. Tetra smiled and asked if he had seen through it. The truth came out. The group had noticed that Almus had been wearing an uneasy expression lately, and Tetra had reported it to the others. Together, they had hatched a plan to stage the emotional scene and make Almus cry on purpose. The blame started flying. Someone accused Ron of being the most invested in the prank, and Ron shot back telling them not to shift responsibility. Another voice chimed in that Rosward had actually been the most enthusiastic one of all, which got a laugh out of everyone. They teased each other about who had rehearsed their lines the hardest, and one of them grabbed another playfully by the collar as the argument continued. As the group walked together through the village, still bickering and laughing, Almus watched them from behind. Despite the prank, despite the teasing, the warmth behind it all was unmistakable. He reflected quietly to himself that he was truly fortunate. This was his family, and this was the life they had built together. With the village running smoothly and the group closer than ever, life settled into a steady rhythm. One day, Almus found himself watching as a group of girls sat together in deep concentration, practicing curse magic. He wasn't impressed. He questioned how effective any of it really was, finding the whole process dull. Someone told him not to disturb them, since they were in the middle of a barrier exercise. There was talk about supplements made through curse techniques, and not everyone was convinced they were safe. Totora was among the group, and her choice of revealing clothes caught some attention. The lesson moved on to more practical matters, covering how certain curse techniques required tedious steps, like using dead animal fur for concealment, which felt like a waste of effort. The topic shifted to soul possession, a technique where a curse mage could transfer their soul into an animal. Everyone agreed it was impressive, though someone brought up the awkward incidents that had happened during training. There was admiration for the idea of flying like an owl, and a playful moment followed as one of them teased another about past mistakes during practice. Then, the conversation turned to creating fire with curse magic. One of them called it a waste of resources, but a demonstration followed anyway. It looked impressive, though, in the end, it was hard to argue it had much practical use. As the night settled in, Almus reflected on his routine tasks around the village, feeling like he had become an alarm clock for everyone else. The moon hung over the river, and the quiet of the evening took over. That quiet was broken when Almus stumbled upon a woman bathing in the river. A comical misunderstanding followed as he tried to explain he hadn't seen anything, but in that moment, he noticed something on her back. It was a mark, a sacred character, and a family crest, the kind that belonged to the Az family. It hinted at a lineage far more significant than anyone in the village realized. The discussion about the mark continued, with someone noting its resemblance to symbols from an older era. Almus reflected quietly on his relationship with the girl who bore it, thinking about how she had grown up under his care, somewhere between a younger sister and a daughter. The scene shifted to the riverbank, where a younger member of the group held a torch and was asked to go fetch some clothes. After that, the setting changed entirely as a group gathered on a wide field under a moonlit mountain sky. Yura approached Almus and asked if the surprise he had planned was related to something Tetra had been working on. Tetra stepped forward and showed everyone a geometric symbol she had drawn on the ground with a red liquid. When someone asked what it was, she revealed it was drawn with her own blood, which caught everyone off guard. Almus watched as Totora cleaned up the area around the symbol and explained a setup involving water and alcohol. She told Ron to put out the light. She assured everyone it was not dangerous, then stepped forward confidently and said she would begin. As the lights went out, Totora called for a spark of light, and the symbol activated. A bright magical reaction lit up the entire area, leaving everyone staring in amazement. She turned to Almus and told him to try it himself, explaining that it worked through curse magic. Almus shook his head and said he could not perform curse magic. Yura stepped in to explain. She said curse magic relied on spiritual strength and that women were usually stronger in that regard. She added that power could also be drawn from external sources, like a hexing stone or other magical artifacts. Despite there being very few teachers, the practice had always been passed down through generations. She went on to describe how even simple curse techniques were instinctive, often woven into dances or songs, and she drew a clear line between curse magic and what Totora was doing, which relied on arithmetic and structured formulas. Totora then showed everyone how her formula worked. She explained that she had derived it using mathematical principles through long sessions of trial and error. Almus joked that she sounded like she was from ancient Greece with her approach. Tetora laughed and told him she had named her creation the Magic Circle. The mood shifted as everyone began to understand what Tetora had actually accomplished. She had taken curse magic, something vague and instinctive, and turned it into something structured and repeatable. Yura and Almus discussed what this could mean for their world. If anyone with the right knowledge could use magic circles, it would change everything. The system was built on arithmetic, on concepts like equations and constants, which meant it could be taught and studied. At the end, Yura turned to Almus and asked him to decide what this new form of magic should be called. Almus thought for a moment and suggested they call it sorcery. Tetora's face lit up. She proudly declared herself the very first sorcerer in the world, laughing as she claimed the title. It was a lighthearted moment, but everyone there understood that something truly significant had just been born. With sorcery now part of their world, the village kept moving forward. A year passed, and the place had changed more than anyone expected. There were now 70 people living there, and it felt truly alive. 30 of them were newcomers who had fled from King Firm's kingdom to escape high taxes, and thanks to everyone's efforts, they had settled in well. Graham thanked Almus for helping with repairs around the village. Almus brought up making sure the adults were getting along with Ron and the others, and Tetra assured him they were all good people. The newcomers had pitched in to expand the fields, and the harvests were more plentiful than ever. Almus felt satisfied that the village was finally self-sufficient. "Everything is fine for now," he said. He gave Tetra her tasks for the day, and before he left, she asked him to pass along her regards to the griffin. Almus made his way to meet the griffin and brought along a jar of wine as a gift. The griffin accepted it, but remarked that it was too little. Almus explained that the wine was valuable trading merchandise, so even a small amount was significant. The griffin brushed off any gratitude, saying it hadn't done anything in particular to help. Still, it admitted the village seemed to be doing well and offered its assistance in dire situations, extending the promise to Almus and his descendants. Almus thanked the griffin for the offer, but said he hoped it would never come to that. The griffin told him to make sure it didn't. Then it spread its wings and took off, leaving Almus standing alone in thought. When he returned to the village, a woman greeted him warmly, calling him "my dear." Almus got flustered, clearly thrown off by what that implied. Before he could process it, the woman told him something urgent had come up and dragged him along. Inside the house, Almus found a crowd of unfamiliar faces and asked Ron what was going on. Ron explained that 30 new people had just arrived, looking for a place to stay. A man named Isle stepped forward as their representative. He explained that they were villagers from King Firm's kingdom and asked for help. A map laid out the situation, showing Almus's village in relation to the kingdoms of Firm and Rosel. Isle introduced himself as the head of the refugee group. It was becoming clear that the conflicts between the surrounding rulers were pushing more and more people toward Almus's doorstep. The refugees explained that they had fled the kingdom of Firm because of famine. Someone asked whether the kingdom was vulnerable to curses, and the explanation came that Firm had executed many of his sorcerers, leaving his kingdom weak against such threats. The conversation turned to the harsh conditions they had escaped. Taxes kept rising, and anyone who couldn't pay faced execution. Then came the rumor. Word had spread about a paradise deep in the forest, protected by a griffin, where abandoned children were living happily. The image of children playing near a river painted an almost dreamlike picture. Someone pointed out that the village had become famous through its trade, selling animal skins and shogi sets to King Rosias, and that reputation was what drew these people here. The refugees dropped to their knees and begged to be allowed to stay. They swore they would do anything, but as much as their desperation was clear, the reality was that taking in 30 more people all at once created a serious problem. Then things got tense. A woman among the refugees turned out to be Ruru's family. She tried to approach Ruru, but Ruru pulled away, furious. "Don't touch me!" she shouted. There was a real pain behind those words, the kind that came from being abandoned. The confrontation hung heavy in the air. A debate broke out among the companions. Ron and Soyeon argued against taking the refugees in, warning it could make things worse with Firm, but someone else pushed back, reminding them that they had all been abandoned once too. They had all fled to this place, and there were small children among the refugees, which made the whole thing even harder to refuse. Almus made his decision. He would go to the kingdom of Firm himself to get a clear picture of the situation. He understood that turning people away when they had nowhere else to go wasn't something he could live with. Tetra agreed to go with him, though she seemed uneasy about it. Before leaving, Almus warned the newcomers not to do anything suspicious while he was gone. He also pulled Tetra aside and promised her he would deal with the situation involving Ruru. With that, Almus and Tetra prepared to set out on horseback. The village was growing, the politics around them were getting more dangerous, and now its leader was riding straight into the heart of the problem. With their minds made up, Almus and Tetra wasted no time getting ready for the journey to Firm's kingdom. Almus called out to Tetra, asking if she was set. She was. He told her they were going by horse and asked her to prepare one. Tetra gave him a look and reminded him that he couldn't even ride. Almus smiled and pulled out something he had been working on, a stirrup. He explained that it was a foothold that attached to the saddle, making it far easier to stay balanced on a horse. Tetra was curious. This world already had saddles, but nobody had ever thought to add stirrups. Almus explained that his old world had gone through the same phase, and that cavalry combat without stirrups was incredibly difficult. He demonstrated how the stirrup worked, showing that even a complete beginner could ride with just a little practice. He pointed out that something this simple could change the way wars were fought entirely. He mentioned that Yura had crafted it outside the village, so nobody else knew about it yet. He asked Tetra to keep it a secret. Almus mounted the horse using the stirrup, and Tetra reminded him to be gentle with the animal. Then they set off together. As they rode, Tetra brought up King Firm. She asked whether he had always been so ambitious. Almus said that Firm used to be different, that people once genuinely loved him. Tetra got a distant look in her eyes and admitted that she didn't hate him either. The sun began to set, and they decided to make camp for the night. The next day, they reached a village and immediately noticed how empty it was. It looked exactly like the descriptions they had heard. Almus approached some of the remaining villagers and asked what had happened. They told him that most of the people had left overnight because the taxes had become impossibly high. Nobody could afford to pay, so entire families just vanished. A search group had been formed to track them down, but so far, nothing had come of it. The villagers assumed Almus and Tetra were merchants. Almus went along with it, telling them they were just passing through on their way north. He offered them some dried fruits, and they struck up a casual conversation. One of the villagers noticed Tetra and asked if she was his wife. Tetra blushed and confirmed that they were newlyweds. The conversation shifted to the villagers' hardships. Almus asked if they had anything they could sell, maybe something that might interest passing soldiers. The villagers looked defeated. They could barely afford to feed themselves, let alone trade. The whole exchange painted a grim picture. This village was on the edge of collapse, crushed under the weight of Firm's taxation. The idea of forming alliances came up, but the despair in their eyes said everything. A young boy asked for 3 slices of food, and one of the group told him to take as much as he wanted. Then, a woman asked about the villagers who had fled, wondering where they could have possibly gone. The answer came quickly. They had most likely run into the forest. Someone pointed out that finding them there would be nearly impossible. The forest was rumored to be a kind of paradise, protected by the griffin. Another person scoffed at the idea while eating, but nobody could deny that the forest was dangerous territory to search. The discussion turned to the kingdom's sorcerers. Someone suggested using soul riding on dogs to track the missing villagers. Another expressed discomfort with the idea, saying that applying soul riding to animals felt wrong. Then the real concern came up, the griffin. If they went into that forest, they would be trespassing on its territory, and nobody wanted to deal with the consequences of that. One of Firm's men showed clear hesitation. The king's orders were to bring the villagers back, but everyone understood what that really meant. They might be brought back as corpses. A soldier muttered that he didn't feel like carrying out those orders, especially since he was set to be deployed soon anyway. The mood was grim. Then a woman rushed to warn Almus that trouble was coming. Firm's soldiers would be heading to their village. Almus took the news seriously and decided to gather everyone for an immediate meeting. He had confirmed that the fleeing villagers were innocent and shared this information with urgency. Inside, the group debated what to do about Firm's soldiers. Someone suggested just handing the villagers over to avoid a confrontation. Almus shut that down immediately. He told them that if they handed those people over, they would be slaughtered. He refused to let that happen, backing up his argument with both strategic and moral reasons. They couldn't afford to look weak, and they couldn't live with the blood on their hands. The group moved outside, where more people had gathered. Discussions about their strength and defenses continued. Faces were tense, but a consensus was forming. The villagers were innocent, and protecting them was the right thing to do. Almus went around the group one final time, making sure nobody had objections. No one spoke against the plan. With full agreement, he told them that time was running out. They needed to move fast. The group set off toward where the fleeing villagers were being held, determined to reach them before Firm's soldiers did. They made it in time. Almus and his group reached the fleeing villagers before Firm's soldiers could. and now he stood before the gathered refugees with Tetra by his side. He announced that he had decided to shelter them temporarily. The crowd reacted with a mix of uncertainty and relief. Some could barely believe it, while others expressed their gratitude. Almus warned them with a serious look that this arrangement was not permanent and that it depended entirely on their behavior. But the relief did not last long. Someone rushed in shouting that something terrible had happened. King Firm's soldiers had been detected approaching through magical sensing. Almus demanded to know where they were, sweat forming on his brow as the gravity of the situation set in. He revealed that King Firm was hunting the refugees down, intending to kill every last one of them as a warning to others. Panic swept through the crowd immediately. People gasped, and fear spread across their faces. Almus shouted at them to calm down, trying to regain control before the chaos spiraled further. He then apologized, acknowledging that sheltering the refugees had brought this danger to the village. He considered the possibility of handing them over to King Firm, but quickly dismissed it, doubting that any peaceful resolution was possible. One of the refugees offered to help, and Almus folded his arms and told them that was exactly what he needed. One of the refugees knelt and thanked him for his kindness. The scene shifted to a private conversation between Almus and someone with extensive negotiation skills, experience gained from trading across the world. Almus removed his cloak and urged everyone to move quickly. He laid out a strategy centered on negotiation rather than combat. The plan was to arm every villager and march out to meet King Firm's forces outside the village, creating the impression that the village could put up a real fight if it came to that. They discussed King Firm's motivations and concluded that his soldiers were likely elite troops who would not want to risk losing even a single man in a pointless skirmish. The key realization was that Firm did not necessarily need all the refugees dead. He just needed proof of their deaths to use as a warning to others. That led them to a solution involving a bronze ring, a recognized symbol of adulthood in the refugees' home country. This ring would serve as false proof of defeat, a token to offer during the negotiation with King Firm's forces. Inside a room, two figures sat at a table. One handed a small object to the other and explained that while it had no value if sold, it was worth everything right now. The other inspected it and noticed a carving on it. It was explained to be a clan seal. They discussed King Firm and both agreed there was little chance he would simply leave peacefully. The scene shifted to King Firm's camp at night, where his men gathered around a fire. One of them expressed frustration over chasing fugitives and said he wished they would just start a revolution so he could fight them head on. When someone asked if they were really going to kill King Firm's runaways, the commander confirmed it without hesitation. He explained that being brutal this once was necessary to set an example. If they showed any leniency, it would only encourage more rebellion. He also mentioned preparations to invade King Roseus's territory and the resources they could seize from it. One of the soldiers shared his confidence in their king's strength, recalling past victories and leadership changes. Even while eating, he praised King Firm's capabilities, though he admitted the king had made one mistake, allowing his daughter to escape. They assumed she could not survive alone in the forest and was probably dead, likely eaten by wolves. But then, a subordinate reported that the fugitives had been located south in a village. The group discussed rumors about the village being guarded by a griffin and debated whether any of it was true. One man scoffed at the myth, but admitted he was wary of facing a creature said to intervene in human affairs. Someone recalled a past encounter with the griffin and the warning they had received not to enter deep into its territory. Despite the risk, the group decided to press forward to the village, rallying with confidence. They approached under cover of night and observed the settlement. Its defenses were rough, more suited for keeping animals out than stopping an army. Then, they spotted someone approaching. The soldiers went on guard and discussed what to do about the armed villagers appearing before them. A lone figure stepped forward boldly, surprising them all. He questioned why King Firm's men were there. Tension hung thick in the air as both sides sized each other up, bracing for whatever came next. A group of soldiers stood on a hilltop holding torches. Among them, a man with spiky hair and a sword on his back stepped forward defiantly. "I'm the one who leads this village. My name is Almus." A scarred man among King Firm's soldiers repeated the name to himself in shock, clearly recognizing it. Almus stood firm and told them he could not hand over innocent people to be slaughtered. "We can't just let you kill them in front of our eyes." The robed man on the slope insisted he was only there to retrieve people who had fled his country and demanded their surrender. The scarred man smirked and proposed they talk it out. He told Almus to come forward alone. Almus agreed without hesitation and stepped away from the villagers, walking straight toward the enemy line. The robed man watched him approach and remarked on his boldness. Meanwhile, Almus called back to his people and told them to stay calm and not to intervene, assuring them everything was under control. Behind him, his companions struggled to hold back their worry. Ron called out to him. Graham readied himself and said to leave it to him if anything went wrong. Rosward considered moving closer for support, but held his position, and Tetra, clasping her hands together with tears forming in her eyes, whispered desperately, "Almus, please don't die. I beg you." The weight of the moment pressed down on all of them as Almus walked alone toward the confrontation that would decide everything. Almus walked straight into the enemy line without looking back. When he reached King Firm, the mustachioed man sat tall on horseback, watching him approach. Almus offered to come closer, but King Firm waved him off, saying there was no need and that it wouldn't be safe. The negotiation began. Almus explained why he couldn't accept Firm's demands, pointing out how small their village's population was. Even so, King Firm refused to let fugitives escape unpunished. Almus suggested a compromise. They could pretend the villagers had been punished, offering their rings as proof of their supposed deaths. King Firm countered with a harsher deal. He wanted the rings and everything the village owned, leaving them with nothing but their lives and the clothes on their backs. Almus thought it over. This lined up with what he had heard about King Firm's character. When Firm settled on taking 70% of their possessions, Almus figured it was better to accept than to push his luck. He agreed to the terms and thanked him. Relief washed over Almus as the whole ordeal ended without bloodshed, but he already had his next move in mind. He planned to consult King Roses about the refugees and what to do going forward. One of his companions wondered whether they would actually receive help, since they paid taxes and had every right to ask for protection. Almus was asked about his connection to King Roses and decided to visit him first. Someone offered to come along to help explain things, but Almus felt uncertain and turned them down for the time being. Then, Tetra spoke up, insisting she wanted to join him. It caught him off guard, but after she pressed the matter, he agreed. As they prepared to leave, Tetra admitted something that had been weighing on her. She had spent her whole life running because of King Firm, running from the fear he brought and the destruction he caused. Almus cut her off gently and told her they needed to go before the sun came up. The scene shifted to a campfire where several people sat together discussing the suffering King Firm had caused. Tetra took responsibility for it, revealing her connection to the Ash family. Later that night, she and Almus talked alone. He told her firmly that her life and her choices belonged to her, not to her family's legacy. Tetra wrestled with the question of whether she should face King Firm directly or keep running from his shadow. In the end, she made her decision. She would confront the problem with King Firm head-on and walk her own path. As the sun began to rise, Almus told Tetra that once the situation with King Firm was resolved, he wanted her to marry him. Tetra latched onto the idea immediately. She repeated, "Marry me," over and over with so much enthusiasm that Almus turned red with embarrassment. They talked about what marriage actually meant, and Tetra made it clear she understood everything it involved: living together, building a life, having children. Then Tetra asked Almus to answer her questions with a simple yes or no. She asked if he loved her. He said yes. She asked if he thought she was a wonderful girl. He said yes again. Then she asked if he would marry her. He said no. Tetra froze, but Almus explained himself. As a man, he wanted to be the one to propose. He looked her in the eyes and said, "Tetra, please marry me." She accepted with pure joy, and they held each other tightly. But the moment couldn't last forever. They both knew the danger they were in, so they decided to hurry toward King Roses' kingdom to make their engagement official. When they arrived, Almus explained their situation to King Roses. He told him about losing their food and possessions. King Roses looked concerned, but reassured them, promising to make sure they had enough food to survive for a year. The conversation turned to the hardships near King Firm's border. King Roses expressed relief that Almus's village had been spared total destruction, noting bluntly that dead villagers couldn't pay taxes. They reached an agreement to take care of the refugees. Then, King Roses noticed Tetra standing beside Almus and asked who the young lady was. Tetra stepped forward and spoke, referencing a visit King Roses had made to the Ash Mansion 10 years ago. His expression changed instantly. He grew stern and demanded the truth, threatening consequences if she was lying. He asked about her father. Tetra told him her father was Lagos Ash, head of the Ash family, and that her mother was Carishian. King Roses remained suspicious and pressed her for her name. Tetra held her ground and introduced herself as Tetra Ash. The revelation hit King Roses hard. He muttered that he hadn't been abandoned by the gods after all, but suspicion still lingered. and he asked her to prove her lineage. Tetra showed him the family crest on her hip. King Rosel examined it and confirmed it was genuine. Then, he asked about a ring. Tetra handed it over to him. Almus looked surprised. It was the first time he had seen the ring. Tetra explained that she had kept it hidden to avoid drawing attention during such desperate times. Almus told her he wasn't angry about the secret. King Rosel, however, interrupted the moment between them and asked to continue verifying her identity by examining the ring more closely. King Rosel continued examining the ring and the family seal. He turned to Almus and asked what he made of it. Almus admitted he didn't fully understand its significance, but noted it resembled a stamp. The king studied the seal closely, then decided they needed a crest specialist to confirm the authenticity of the crest, ring, and seal together. A woman in the room acknowledged the plan with a serious expression. Someone checked on Tetra, asking if she was all right. She nodded, confirming she was ready. The woman gestured for Tetra to follow, addressing her respectfully. Tetra kept a neutral expression as she went along, while Almus watched them leave. King Rosel then turned to Almus and asked about Tetra's origins. Almus explained that she had been part of their village for years, suggesting a deep, long-standing connection. The conversation shifted when Almus was asked how long he had known about Tetra's true identity. He admitted he had discovered it a few years ago, looking slightly guilty as he explained that Tetra had asked him to keep it secret. King Rosel was understanding, given that Tetra was the last surviving member of her family, and he granted Almus leniency. The king then changed the subject to Almus's intentions toward Tetra. Despite the class differences between them, Almus boldly declared that he had promised to marry her. The king challenged the feasibility of this, pointing out their class disparity, but Almus stood firm, saying he would elevate his status to at least a lesser noble to make the union possible. The discussion then turned to Almus's progress on a task the king had assigned him regarding centralization. Almus admitted the work was incomplete, but he proposed an idea, utilizing the power of the people. As they talked about centralizing the regions, Almus suggested reducing the political power of the influential families to benefit both the kingdom and its citizens. Almus went further, emphasizing the king's role in protecting his people. He argued that the kingdom should side with its people against the influential families. He proposed that the crown safeguard the lives and possessions of its subjects, and King Rosel fell into deep thought over the implications. Almus explained that by establishing a protection duty, the balance of power would shift. Instead of the influential families dominating, it would become a matter of those families standing against the royalty and the people combined. That framing would give the crown a justified reason to act. He warned, however, that the influential families would inevitably try to seize even more control. King Rosel found the idea fascinating and admitted it was really interesting, but another voice cut in, questioning whether such changes would only happen if the people themselves demanded them. The conversation broadened to the Kryuu Federation, which operated differently because it had no king, instead using a republican system. Someone predicted that the people of Adelnia, drawn to that ideology, might start taking an interest in similar ideas because of Kryuu's influence. The discussion then touched on the aftermath of the uprising led by King Firm and how the push for centralized government had emerged because of it. They debated how to handle the influential families once their political power was reduced, with suggestions like offering them land and paying off their debts. Almus proposed creating a centralized court that would maintain unified power while granting limited autonomy to the regions, which would cut down on upkeep costs. The discussion reinforced the importance of centralizing political power to stabilize the kingdom's governance. Then, the mood shifted entirely. Raymond suddenly asked Almus to become his adopted son. The proposition came out of nowhere and shocked everyone in the room. "I'm your papa starting from today," he declared. The offer was met with stunned disbelief, and someone quickly ushered Almus out of the room. Almus walked away in a daze, trying to make sense of what had just happened. His thoughts drifted to Tetra. Meanwhile, back in the room, Raymond's brother questioned his motives. Raymond revealed his true plan. He intended to make Almus the next king. The statement stunned everyone. Raymond insisted it was a necessary move, despite the others pointing out Almus's young age and commoner status. The discussion turned to the alternative candidate for the throne, Duel. Raymond described him as reckless and problematic. Others voiced their concerns about Rhaegar's temperament, calling him careless and prone to violence. One of the men flatly refused to support Rhaegar's rule, fearing it would destabilize the entire country. Raymond went further, suggesting that the Duel family could be removed from the equation if necessary. The conversation ended on a skeptical note, with someone questioning whether Rhaegar would cooperate with any of their plans at all. The group agreed that Duel was not suitable, but one of them questioned why a young man like Almus should be involved in such a matter. Raymond responded firmly, insisting that Almus was the right person for the task. He laid out his reasoning, highlighting Almus's influential background and contrasting it sharply with Duel's. He noted that Almus had a creative mind and a deep understanding of centralization, knowledge that was almost mysterious in how advanced it was. Raymond declared confidently that Almus would become a great king with some experience, despite his youth. They discussed unification plans involving the Deebles, but acknowledged it was impossible at this point. The focus shifted to uniting with the Ash family instead. It was revealed that Almus and Tetra were already in love, which made a marriage between them an ideal political move as well. The scene showed Almus and Tetra together, their mutual affection clear. The strategy was laid out. By marrying Almus to Tetra of the Ash family, they could restore the family's power and complete the unification between the Ash and Rose's households. Raymond agreed to adopt Almus, weighing his qualities against Duel's and concluding that Almus was far more worthy of royalty. Almus was called back in and told the king wanted to see him. A servant led him to the royal figures, and he was welcomed and offered a seat. The proposal was made formally. They wanted him to become an adopted son of the royal family. They explained their reasoning, noting that Almus's background as the son of the Griffin added significant value. His potential political influence, combined with the fact that he had already been protecting Tetra, made him an ideal candidate. They even noted the appeal of the story itself. A tale of a young man rising from nothing, protecting a noblewoman, and marrying her had the makings of a legend. The public would rally behind it. Almus listened to everything, then asked for time to consult with his friends before giving an answer. He promised to return with his decision. The others agreed to wait, confident that the answer would be a positive one. With the adoption offer still weighing on his mind, Almus prepared to leave. Tetra called out to him, and he acknowledged her with a nod. She had finished what she needed to do on her end. A man nearby confirmed that Tetra was indeed the daughter of the Ash family patriarch and handed a significant object back to Almus. He took it, said he understood, and told them he was ready to go. Before making any decision about the adoption, he needed to talk to his friends first. Tetra asked if they were heading back to the village, and he confirmed, mentioning he had to inform the others as well. The two of them mounted a horse and rode back together. When they arrived, Ron greeted them enthusiastically, welcoming them home. Someone asked whether they had managed to secure food, given how long they had been gone. The rest of the group rushed over, calling out to their leader and to Tetra, excited to see them back. Almus gathered everyone and announced the deal. They would receive food for an entire year in exchange for taking in refugees. The villagers erupted in cheers. He told the refugees to start working from that very day, then thanked everyone for holding things down while he was away. After that, he asked for the usual members to be gathered, saying he had something important to discuss. Inside a building, the group sat around a table. Almus brought up the truth about Tetra being the Ash family's princess. The room went quiet with surprise. Tetra apologized for keeping it hidden, but the others quickly reassured her. They told her it was normal to have things from the past you wanted to keep private, and that nothing about their friendship had changed. Then, Almus dropped something even bigger. He told them he had received an offer from Raymond, King Rose's brother, to be adopted into the royal family. The group erupted in shock and excitement. They joked about what that would mean for their own positions within the kingdom's hierarchy. Almus went quiet for a moment. Internally, things felt different from what he had expected. Memories from his past life surfaced, of friends leaving the orphanage one by one, of the loneliness that followed. When someone asked if he truly wanted to go through with the adoption, he hesitated, wondering why none of them were trying to stop him. They told him plainly that they would never hold him back from something like this. He wrestled with it. The adoption could bring real success, but it also meant spending time away from Tetra and the village. His friends told him straight. They would have less time together, sure, but it was not like they would never see each other again. One of them looked him in the eye and said they were behind him completely, that they were all cheering for him. Almus felt grateful to have friends like these. He decided to spend one more night in the village before giving his final answer about the adoption. Night fell, and Almus and his friends said their goodnights. One of them wondered aloud if they might get to meet the king someday. Despite the excitement, there was a quiet sadness at the thought of Almus and Tetra leaving, but the group shook it off. They told each other they would work hard to catch up to him, so that one day they could proudly call themselves his retainers. In the end, Almus went to Raymond and told him he humbly accepted the offer. His decision was made, strengthened by the encouragement and support of the people closest to him. Raymond immediately got excited and asked Almus to call him Papa from now on. Almus hesitated, saying that was a bit much. Before the moment could settle, another man walked in, apologized for interrupting, and announced he had something important to say. He told Almus to call him father instead, and began advising him on what would be expected of him as part of the family. As they prepared to move, Tetra mentioned she would be going with Boros to learn the ways of a powerful family. Meanwhile, Almus was told he needed to learn proper etiquette. Someone pointed out that it was common for even influential family members to lack skills like writing, but Almus said he had already learned from Tetra, showing he was more prepared than they expected. The conversation shifted to a grand event being held across the kingdom. It was a celebration meant to formally introduce Almus into the family and honor Tetra's safe return. They reminded him not to forget his reputation as the son of the Griffin, a title that carried real weight. The event was bustling and lively, and Almus admitted he was exhausted from all of it. Yura approached him during the celebration, saying it had been a long time since they last spoke. She was surprised to learn he had become part of the Ash family and expressed disbelief at how much had changed. Almus asked how the Rose's family viewed his new status, and she pointed out some of the attendees from the Duel family, who clearly were not pleased with his rise. Then the mood shifted. Yura revealed that she was engaged to Rosel Kingdom. Almus asked how she felt about it, and she did not hold back. She told him she hated Rosel. Then, quietly, she admitted she wished she could be engaged to Almus instead. He was caught off guard and did not know how to respond. Tetra then introduced Boros, head of a branch of the Ash family, and Almus thanked him for looking after Tetra all this time. Boros was overwhelmed with emotion and pledged his loyalty on the spot, expressing deep regret that he had not been able to protect Princess Tetra from the hardships she had endured. Almus reflected on the strange position he was in, with the Duel family hating him, while the Ash family stood firmly behind him. The conversation took a lighter turn when someone brought up the topic of Almus and Tetra's marriage. Almus admitted the intention was real, but it had not been made official yet. Yura overheard and offered her congratulations, her voice a little strained. She told them she would keep it a secret for now. The exchange ended with a heartfelt round of congratulations directed at both Almus and Tetra as they adjusted to their new roles and the shifting relationships around them. During the event, an enthusiastic man approached Almus and challenged him to a game of shogi, praising him as the creator of the game. Others nearby chimed in, eager for a match as well. Later, as they traveled, Almus rode alongside a companion and reflected on how hectic things had been. He mentioned they would be able to return to the village more often soon. He admitted he had not expected to be away for an entire month. His companion seemed relieved, but also carried a quiet sense of unease about what lay ahead. Another man joined them on the road, cheerfully commenting on how Almus had rocketed up in status. He joked that Almus had skipped the normal progression entirely and jumped straight into the royal family. The man took a swig from a drink, and Almus wrinkled his nose at the stench of alcohol on his breath. His companion, riding with him, questioned whether this carefree drunkard was really going to be useful. As they continued, Almus thought about the people back in the village and hoped everyone was doing all right. When they arrived, something felt wrong. The crowd was larger than expected, and the village leadership was nowhere to be seen. The tension was immediate, a sign that things might have gone sideways while they were away. Then, a child's scream cut through the noise. It was a voice rejecting a parental figure, full of pain and anger. Almus recognized it instantly. It was Lulu. Without hesitating, he told the group to hurry, and they rushed forward to see what was happening. Almus rushed toward the commotion and found Lulu in distress, screaming for them to stop, insisting they were not her parents, as someone gripped her arm tightly. One of his men hurried out of a nearby building, alarmed, trying to figure out what was going on. Almus pushed through and was greeted by another villager, who quickly filled him in. Inside, two women were already consoling the shaken girl. Almus looked around, struggling to make sense of it all, and asked someone to explain exactly what had happened. The man told him they had reached a decision on something Almus had previously ordered. However, two people had tried to get in touch with Lulu and caused trouble in the process. The pair bowed on the ground in apology. Almus turned to them and made the impact of their actions on Lulu clear. He told them flatly that it did not matter what their reason was. They had thrown Lulu away, and that fact would never change. Almus then confronted one of the bowing figures directly and asked why they had broken the rule. The person, visibly nervous, begged for forgiveness, saying they had already been punished and asking if that could be enough. The plea was met with a swift punch, sending shockwaves through everyone watching, including Almus and his allies. Almus warned them sternly that if they did it again, they would be exiled. The reprimanded person accepted with a quiet nod. A nearby observer commented on how quickly the situation had been resolved, impressed by the intervention of a refugee named Ayal, who had helped diffuse the tension. The discussion then shifted to the village's defense. One of the group suggested fortifying the area with a canal and pit. Almus voiced his concerns about their numbers, noting that even though their population was around 100, they only had about 40 men. A strategic debate followed about the capital's defense, with the consensus that if an enemy army brought a large force, they would need enough power to fight back. The mood lightened when Almus agreed to a mock fight with Bartolo, a military leader who commanded the front against the firm kingdom. Bartolo challenged him playfully, suggesting a sparring match to test his swordsmanship. Almus, intrigued, accepted the challenge. Tetra watched from the side, surprised but curious as they prepared to spar. The sparring kicked off with energy. Almus attacked Bartolo head-on, shouting as he swung. The wooden swords clashed hard enough that Bartolo's blade snapped from the force. Both Almus and Tetra were taken aback. Almus admitted that a wooden training sword simply could not withstand his power. Bartolo was thrown back, but both men seemed to enjoy the exchange, their mutual respect growing through the experience. Almus demonstrated his raw lower body strength next, and Bartolo reacted with genuine surprise, asking just how strong he really was. Almus gave a confident display. As the conversation continued, Bartolo recalled that Yulia had mentioned something about Almus having a blessing, and he smiled nervously at the thought. Bartolo admitted that even with his own abilities, he would never want to face Almus in a real battle. Almus stayed calm, taking the recognition in stride without letting it go to his head. A group of enthusiastic recruits then approached, begging to join the military. They expressed their desire to fight alongside Almus, showing clear determination and loyalty. Bartolo proposed a training session to test the recruits, and Almus agreed. He encouraged them to give their best effort. The scene moved to the training grounds, where soldiers were practicing with high morale. Almus observed the conscripts during archery practice and noted their enthusiasm, pointing out that their eagerness came from being conscripts who chose to be there, not hired mercenaries. Tetra mentioned the ongoing archery training and that Ron and others were taking their tests. Almus looked around for Graham, showing his hands-on involvement in the military preparations. At the archery range, a young recruit blamed the oversized bow for his failure to hit the target, while a more experienced archer critiqued his form. The training highlighted the real challenges the recruits faced in getting up to standard. The recruit tried again, and with some guidance from the experienced soldier on proper technique, he actually managed to hit the target. The onlookers praised the shot, though they chalked it up to beginner's luck. Tetra commented that the recruits moved differently from ordinary soldiers. Almus explained that he had taught them kendo techniques from his previous world, which gave them a distinct fighting style. The swordplay training intensified with a sparring match between Ron and an opponent. Ron stepped forward with excitement, boldly introducing himself before the duel began. The duel heated up as Ron countered attacks with fluid grace, demonstrating the skills he had learned from Almus. The spectators watched closely, clearly impressed by the display of trained swordsmanship. Ron proved himself decisively, and the onlookers remarked on how he had taken down yet another opponent. It was a clear testament to how Almus's unconventional training methods had made his followers genuinely formidable. The tension spiked when one soldier informed another that they had lost yet another man, frantically urging them to just finish the enemy off. A determined fighter declared himself the second strongest after Bartolo, eager to prove his worth. Someone else shot back that it was impossible, but the young man pressed forward, shocked by the gravity of what was unfolding around him. The scene shifted to a quieter moment on a balcony, where Yulia and Almus sat together. Yulia had a calm but purposeful air about her, as she mentioned a strange feeling and brought up what Bartolo had said about Almus's strength. Almus listened carefully, his expression deep in thought. Yulia smirked and offered to explain something she had realized. She told him to come closer. Almus leaned in, curious, and the atmosphere grew still as they moved indoors. Yulia revealed that Almus's blessing, the Great King's blessing, worked by strengthening his allies as more people accepted him as their leader. Almus was surprised. He had not realized how much it had developed over the past year. Yulia explained further that while the boost would not match the original owner's full strength, it still significantly empowered both Almus and his followers. Almus took this in and nodded with understanding. Yulia teased him about how none of his villagers ever seemed to catch colds anymore, pointing out that their increased physical resilience was a side effect of his blessing. Almus asked why she was telling him all of this now. Yulia admitted she had wanted him to figure it out on his own, and that she had found it amusing watching him remain oblivious. Then, the mood shifted. Yulia confessed that she was engaged to Regal Deeble and intended to marry him. Almus was visibly caught off guard. She went on to explain that her goal was to make Regal the king, adding a layer of political calculation to her decision. Yulia said she would also need to produce a successor, and that was why she had chosen to tell Almus everything now, before it was too late. Her eyes carried both determination and a quiet sadness as she acknowledged the weight of what lay ahead. Almus listened with concern, but respected her resolve. The scene ended with a tender farewell. Yulia leaned in and kissed Almus. She looked at him with warmth and sorrow, and told him she loved him, though she knew it was hopeless. She asked him to take care of Tetra. Then, with a bittersweet smile, she asked him to remember that she had been his first kiss. Almus stood in silent reflection as the view pulled back to the cityscape, closing out their intimate goodbye. After Yuria's heartfelt farewell, Almus stood alone, her words still echoing in his mind. She had chosen her path, but not everyone around her agreed with it. As two figures walked away from a private meeting, a young man lingered behind, still processing what had been said. Raymond turned to his companion and warned him not to reveal anything unnecessary to Yuria, but their conversation was far from over. It turned to the princess's marriage, and the younger man did not hold back. He argued that Almus would be a far better match for her, pointing out that any girl would despair if she were forced to marry a man who had killed his own wife. He insisted that if Yuria's happiness mattered at all, Almus was the clear choice. The discussion shifted to what it would mean politically to make Almus king. The Deeble family would almost certainly rebel, and the kingdom could be torn apart like a pie split between too many hands. Raymond stressed the danger of pushing Almus forward without accounting for the powerful families that would oppose it. A move like that could trigger civil war. Meanwhile, Almus was busy with something else entirely. He was producing black powder and explaining its composition to Tetra, who watched with fascination. He admitted he had never wanted to advance military technology, not after everything he had been through, but the looming threat from King Firm left him no choice. He walked Tetra through the process, step by step. Sulfur was easy to come by thanks to the nearby volcanoes, and the rest of the ingredients, charcoal and potassium nitrate, could be prepared using traditional methods. Once everything was ready, he told Tetra to step back. He tested the mixture, and the blast that followed was deafening. They were both impressed. Almus explained that packing the powder inside a container would amplify the explosion even further. He asked Tetra to create a magic circle capable of producing fire, something they could use to ignite the powder reliably. A month passed. Almus met with Bartolo and laid out a strategy built around the phalanx formation. He used diagrams to show how the left side of the formation could be shielded, and together they worked through the weaknesses, especially the vulnerability to cavalry charges. Almus brought up the stirrup, calling it a critical invention, though he noted that having stirrups alone would not turn just anyone into a cavalry soldier. Bartolo praised his intelligence, remarking that everyone seemed to recognize how sharp Almus was. That got a mild eye roll from Almus. He then grabbed a bottle and led Bartolo outside to a clearing near a tree. He set up a demonstration using the contents of the bottle. A moment later, a massive explosion tore through the area, leaving Bartolo staring in shock. Bartolo gaped at the shattered debris. "What the? How did you do that?" Almus held up his staff and asked what he thought, clearly proud of the result. The two of them sat down inside a tent afterward, and Bartolo called the invention incredible. He started to link it to Almus's background before catching himself and apologizing for the slip. Almus brushed it off, standing confidently and confirming that they could produce more. In a separate meeting, Almus and Bartolo exchanged assurances about their readiness. Bartolo vouched for the reliability and discipline of his men, and Almus told him that with everything in place, they could win. Preparations began in earnest. 2 years passed. King Firm received troubling news. A messenger reported that Tetra and the forces of the Az territory were involved in a rebellion. He cursed himself for not having eliminated her when he had the chance. Before he could finish processing that, another messenger arrived with even worse news. King Rosel's kingdom was in turmoil due to a succession crisis. King Firm saw an opportunity. If King Rosel could not command his forces, the time to invade was now. He devised a plan to launch a surprise attack through a forest path leading straight to the palace, using intelligence his spies had gathered earlier. One of his advisors raised concerns about Graham's possible retaliation, but King Firm dismissed the warning entirely. Elsewhere, two hooded figures prepared their possession magic, sending their consciousness into birds for surveillance. The birds flew over Almus's village, noting the improved defenses, but seeing no soldiers in sight. They completed their reconnaissance without spotting any immediate threats. As the birds turned back, however, larger predatory birds swooped in and attacked them. Panic set in as the curse masters realized that if the birds were killed while they were possessing them, the backlash could destroy their own minds. One bird barely escaped, and the curse masters wondered whether King Roseus' forces had orchestrated the ambush. Then, an arrow struck another bird clean out of the sky. One of the observers on the ground noted the shot, acknowledging that someone on the other side had impressive aim. A large bird landed on a woman's arm, and the group praised the surprise counterattack against the enemy spies. Another member of the team claimed the second hit, and they discussed their strategy for dealing with the surveillance birds. Someone raised the concern that killing the enemy's curse masters through their own magic might provoke a harsher response. Then, a rider arrived on horseback at full speed, and the excitement was immediate. He had been riding without rest, and he brought urgent news. King Rosé had suffered a sudden collapse from his chronic illness, and King Firm's soldiers had already started moving. The neighboring kingdoms were stirring as well. Almus quickly grasped the situation. Reinforcements would not arrive for 3 days, and until then, they were on their own. He was told to hold off King Firm's forces for those 3 days to keep the situation from spiraling out of control. Ron confirmed that they had already checked the black powder reserves, and everything was ready. They had enough supplies to last. The group rallied together, resolved to defend their village no matter what it took. Meanwhile, on King Firm's side, tension was building. His commander discussed the disappearance of the curse masters who had been sent to spy on the territory. There was speculation that natural predators had gotten them, or perhaps the magic users from King Roseus' kingdom were responsible. The possible involvement of an adopted son connected to the royal family added another layer of uncertainty. Despite all the unknowns, King Firm's forces decided to press forward with reconnaissance before committing to a full assault. Their confidence had not wavered. They fully intended to celebrate their victory inside King Rosé's palace. With King Firm's forces on the move and reinforcements still days away, the war had officially begun. On the enemy's side, a strategist gave the order to deploy 3,200 soldiers, with another 200 tasked to capture a nearby village. Almus was uneasy about the scale of what was coming. The enemy could field up to 15,000 soldiers, and an all-out war seemed inevitable. But there was one piece of good news. Rigard de Bell had agreed to stay out of the fight in exchange for the crown, which meant the second greatest power in the kingdom would not be making any moves. Still, not everyone was convinced. There was a lingering suspicion that Rigard would look for a chance to betray them the moment it suited him. The discussion turned to the Rosel Kingdom's strategy. The Rosel family was dispatching their army to neighboring borders to keep other threats at bay. Someone pointed out that after all the recent divisions, the Rosel Kingdom could muster around 10,000 soldiers at most. Confidence began to build among the troops. They reminded each other of their king's past victories and what they had already accomplished together. A toast was raised for victory, and the room erupted in unified cheers, morale soaring. Far away in the mountains, lookouts spotted King Firm's small force of 200 soldiers approaching, just as the reports had predicted. Some panicked at the sight, but others assured them the fortress was well protected and ready. A tense exchange took place at the gates. The enemy demanded they open up, promising safety in exchange for surrender and food supplies. The answer was immediate. "We refuse." Almus rallied everyone to their positions, directing the defense to focus on the main gate where the attack was expected to hit. He explained that any attempt to breach the fort would cost the attackers dearly. The moat and the height difference gave the defenders a massive advantage. One soldier speculated that the enemy would try to sneak in rather than attack head-on. Sure enough, a battering ram appeared, backed by soldiers carrying shields. The frontal assault had begun. The defenders prepared to bombard them with stones, but the enemy moved fast, covering their advance with boards laid over the pitfalls. One of the traps triggered anyway, and soldiers fell into the pit. The spikes hidden at the bottom did the rest. Stones started raining down on the attackers, but the enemy answered with a volley of arrows. The call went out immediately to take cover. Everyone braced themselves as the battle intensified. 2 soldiers crouched behind their shields, trusting them to hold as arrows whipped overhead. Fear gripped them, but they held their ground, waiting for the barrage to ease up. One of them cried out in pain as an arrow found its mark. The others huddled behind whatever cover they could find. injured and rattled, but refusing to give in. A soldier checked on the wounded and warned that they needed better protection. An archer climbed to a watchtower and took aim, determined to return fire. His eyes locked onto the enemy archer with fierce concentration, but before he could loose his shot, debris and stones rained down around him, blocking his line of sight. He shouted in frustration. On the front lines, chaos was spreading. Rocks and arrows kept flying, and a commanding officer ordered fresh troops to replace the injured. The enemy had the upper hand, firing arrows almost unopposed. The main gate was close to falling. The advancing forces were nearly through. The defenders rallied hard, and their leaders shouted for calm, insisting this was all part of the plan, even as things looked desperate. Soldiers threw everything they had into pushing a massive log against the doors, straining with everything they had. The troop leader assessed the damage and warned that if the assault kept up, the gate would not hold much longer. Then the order came. A signal was given, and everything happened fast. Fire erupted along a trench, ignited through synchronized signals and strategic placement. Flames surged upward from a corridor beneath the gate, engulfing the enemy forces. Smoke billowed everywhere as the trap finally sprung. The defenders erupted in cheers. Relief and triumph washed over them as they realized the full scope of the plan had worked. Almus reflected on every piece of it, the hidden moat, the tunnels beneath the fortress, all of it coming together exactly as designed. It was a dangerous gamble, but it had paid off brilliantly. As the dust settled, the exhausted defenders talked through what had just happened. They noted the fake bridges, the collapsed tunnels, and the camouflage that had fooled the enemy at every turn. The whole defense had been built on layers of deception, and every single one had done its job. Almus explained how the storage area near the gate had been packed with jars of oil and explosives. The plan was simple. Let the enemy pile up at the gate, then blow the whole thing. Two soldiers nearby caught a whiff of the aftermath and recoiled, pinching their noses at the awful stench. The group moved through the devastated area outside the gate. One of them muttered that it looked like a scene straight out of hell. Debris was everywhere, and someone warned the others to watch their step as rubble continued to shift and fall. They spotted a person pinned under the wreckage and rushed over to help. They lifted the debris off the trapped figure and checked on him. The leader, bruised but alive, responded with a sarcastic remark, taking back something he had said earlier about showing mercy to survivors who might fight back. They pressed forward and found more enemy soldiers in the wreckage. Almus knelt before an injured man and made the threat clear. He told him to talk or lose his head. The man, broken and out of options, gave in immediately. "I'll tell you anything," he said, surrendering whatever information he had. The battle was over. The fortress had held, and Almus's strategy had proven itself. What had seemed like a desperate defense turned out to be a carefully layered trap that crushed the enemy from every angle. Word of Almus's victory had not yet reached the palace. Back at the capital, the mood was tense. One of the officials read through a letter and voiced his frustration over Rosel Kingdom's refusal to send soldiers, since Rosel was too focused on protecting his own territory. Another official pointed out that this was actually an opportunity. If they could handle the crisis without the Deepening clan's help, it would strengthen their political standing. Then the report arrived. Almus's village had defeated King Firm's army without a single casualty and had even captured the enemy general. The reaction was immediate shock. The official ordered Almus to report to him at once, clearly impressed by the unexpected victory. The conversation shifted to strategy. One advisor explained that they could gather 7,000 soldiers within 3 days, but after accounting for troops already deployed to neighboring kingdoms, they would have around 3,000 to face King Firm's forces. They discussed King Firm's reputation as a military genius, noting his tactical edge thanks to resources supplied by the Domorgal Empire. Despite all of that, they decided to appoint Almus as the commander, tasked with repelling King Firm's army, even though his actual battlefield experience was limited. Almus was reassured that he would not be making every decision alone. Boros and another experienced advisor would serve as his seconds in command, guiding him through the critical moments on the field. As Almus prepared to mobilize, King Rosel assured him of the political and military support behind the mission, stressing that bodyguards and loyal fighters would accompany him. Almus was ordered to dispatch his soldiers immediately. Almus looked around at his team, checking that each of them was ready to march. One by one, they confirmed their commitment. Someone joked about always being stuck at Almus's side, which lightened the mood. Rhea stepped forward as a cavalry soldier, expressing her gratitude for the freedom Almus had given her and her eagerness to fight. The group's bond was clear. One of the freed soldiers declared his determination to fight alongside Rosward, acknowledging everything Almus had done for them. The mood turned warm as they encouraged each other to head into battle together. Before leaving, Almus entrusted Ainz with overseeing the village in his absence, telling him to send word immediately if anything went wrong. Ainz was almost comically eager to follow Almus instead, but accepted the responsibility. Almus looked over his people one last time and silently urged them all to come back alive. The army was on the move. 3,000 soldiers from Rosel marched forward in formation, led by Almus on horseback. He asked about their heading, and a soldier explained they were moving to intercept King Firm's forces based on information from the captured general. Almus looked tense. One of his soldiers told him to relax, reminding him that experienced men would be supporting him every step of the way. Almus admitted he was nervous, but said he appreciated the reassurance. Another soldier teased him, asking if he was getting cold feet. He denied it. 2 soldiers nearby discussed the plan quietly, agreeing that the commander just needed to stay on his horse and come back in one piece. Others whispered about Almus's background and lineage as they marched. As the army advanced toward King Firm's main force, Almus said he wanted to fight at the front lines rather than just give orders from the rear. Boros advised against it, explaining that King Rosales had given strict orders to keep Almus out of direct danger. Almus thanked him, and Boros acknowledged that Almus was strong enough to fight with a spear if it came to it. Soyeon warned Almus not to do anything reckless, tapping his shield to drive the point home. He told her he understood. A scout reported that enemy soldiers were about an hour away to the east. The group discussed the advantage their magic users gave them, with a few soldiers joking about the good fortune of being under King Rosales' command. The mood shifted as the army prepared for the clash. King Firm's troops were reportedly high in morale, driven by desperation and the need to seize enemy provisions to survive. Despite the enemy having more soldiers, Almus was urged to step up and issue his commands as the commander-in-chief. Almus steadied himself and called out for the soldiers to get into formation. This was the moment he had been planning for. The strategy he had devised 2 years earlier was finally about to be put into action. On the other side of the field, King Firm received reports about the unusual positioning of the Rosales army. He studied the formation with interest, noting the unexpected distribution of troops. The arrangement seemed designed for psychological pressure, echoing tactics from past battles that had proven effective before. King Firm assessed the enemy's strategy. He recognized that the Rosé forces were concentrating their strength on the left wing, aiming to crush his right flank quickly. He acknowledged the plan was well constructed, but he was confident it would be easy to counter. Concentrating on one side left the other exposed. He smirked behind his helmet. "This battle is already our win." A commander roared the order to charge. Soldiers on horseback surged forward, weapons drawn, thundering across the battlefield. One of the warriors near Almus voiced his worry, saying this was nothing like the village skirmishes they had fought before. He asked anxiously what to expect. Almus explained that unlike their village defense, this battle would be decided by foot soldiers clashing on an open field. Both sides had cavalry positioned on their flanks, but since horsemen moved faster than infantry, the cavalry would engage each other first before the main lines collided. He stressed that winning the cavalry fight would be the key to controlling the entire battle. Whoever dominated on the flanks could swing around and hit the enemy's infantry from the side, turning the whole engagement. That was why Rosward and Rhea were so critical. They led the cavalry on the left flank, riding hard into the fight. Almus put his faith in them. "I'm counting on you, Rosward." The wide view of the battlefield showed both armies charging toward each other, formations stretching across the horizon. The scale was massive. Almus watched his cavalry close the distance and said with quiet confidence that if anyone could pull it off, it was those two. The two cavalry lines slammed into each other with tremendous force. Rosward and Rhea led the charge, just as Almus had trusted them to, and the collision was brutal. Horses crashed together, and soldiers were thrown from their mounts as the left flank erupted into chaos. In the middle of it all, a female cavalry warrior cut through the fighting with sharp, precise movements, steering her horse with complete control. One enemy soldier spotted her approach and sneered, mocking her for riding into battle. She answered by striking him clean off his horse without so much as flinching. As the fighting raged on, allied soldiers called out for Rosward, rallying around each other in the thick of the melee. Amid the chaos, someone checked on a comrade named Rhea, asking if she was all right. Rhea responded calmly, thanking them and confirming she was fine. Even in the heat of battle, the bonds between these fighters held strong. The conversation shifted to strategy. Rosward and Rhea, both empowered by a divine blessing, were fighting at heightened strength, and that was shaping the tactical decisions being made. But the enemy's heavy infantry had begun to push forward. Recognizing the threat, the commander ordered the deployment of explosive spears, a secret weapon the Az army had been holding in reserve. The spears launched into the enemy formations and detonated on impact, tearing apart their lines in a series of violent blasts. On the opposing side, an officer watched the mysterious explosions and ordered his troops to maintain their defensive rotations. King Firm himself remained unfazed. He was convinced the phalanx would hold, dismissing the explosive attacks as insufficient. "Phalanx won't break from just that level of attack," he declared, fully committed to pressing the battle forward. The Az army pulled back to regroup, preparing for the next phase. Their use of explosive tactics against the entrenched enemy phalanx had been calculated from the start, designed to soften the formation before the real assault began. Orders came down to hold a strong defensive front line, while the elite forces shifted to the right side, aiming to surround the enemy from both flanks. A strategy map showed the plan clearly: lure the enemy in, then close the trap around them. One of the commanders surveyed the field with a determined look and concluded that the battle was already won. But the moment of confidence was short-lived. Another officer spotted their own flank, left exposed, and called for an immediate charge to secure it, warning that a phalanx was dangerously vulnerable to attacks from the side. As the fighting escalated, a young commander stepped forward and boldly announced himself as Almus, the son of the Griffin, drawing every enemy eye toward him. King Firm, confused at first, quickly locked onto the name and offered rewards to anyone who could bring Almus down. Almus stood his ground and fired back, declaring his strength and the divine blessing that protected him. A soldier nearby warned Almus to be careful as the battle closed in around him. A group of warriors pledged to protect Almus on the spot, recognizing who he was and the weight of the name he carried. Then, his allies arrived as reinforcements, and the reunion gave everyone a surge of energy. Almus rallied his troops and laid out his plan to stop the enemy advance with their combined strength. As he challenged the opposing forces head-on, the veteran enemy commander realized they had badly underestimated what Almus was capable of. Even as the enemy regrouped and pushed back, the momentum belonged to Almus and his forces. Morale was high, and skill carried them forward. Rosward and Rhea led a flanking cavalry charge that struck the enemy at their most vulnerable positions, seizing a decisive tactical advantage. On the enemy side, a commander frantically ordered his men to protect the exposed flanks. He acknowledged the arrival of the enemy cavalry, but tried to stay composed, deploying his heavy foot soldiers to shore up the position. Both sides recognized they were now evenly matched in numbers, and the battleground to a tense stalemate, as each commander braced for what came next. King Firm glared across the battlefield and taunted his opponent. "Damn you, but your resistance ends here," he said, predicting that his left wing would crush the enemy's right. His soldiers roared encouragement, holding their ground and preparing for the final push. The strategy map showed Firm's forces spread wide, banking on that left wing to break through. But something was wrong. The expected collapse of the enemy's right flank never came. One of Firm's men pointed out the standstill, confused. From the opposing side, someone responded with a mocking grin. "You do look rather dumbfounded there, don't you, King Firm?" The reason became clear in an instant. The enemy formation was slanted. It was the Lock's phalanx, a tactic designed to delay the clash on the weaker right side while concentrating overwhelming force on the left. From above, the slanted formation was unmistakable, and the realization hit Firm's forces like a wave. Soldiers on Firm's side stared in shock as they understood the miscalculation. "It's because our formation is slanted," the opposing commander declared. By angling the entire army, he had bought time for his weaker flank, while his strongest units hammered Firm's vulnerable side. Another officer explained that the heavy slant was specifically designed to delay contact with the enemy's strongest wing. King Firm's face dripped with sweat. "Lock's phalanx?" he exclaimed, recognizing the legendary tactic. The opposing commander pressed the advantage, claiming that the defeat of Firm's army was now inevitable. A subordinate urged King Firm to pull back, but Firm refused. His eyes burned with determination. "In that case, I'll kill you with my own hands," he declared. Almus accepted the challenge without hesitation. "I accept your challenge, King Firm," he shouted, vowing to avenge every life that had been lost. Ron was told to step back as the two leaders prepared to face each other directly, the fate of the battle now resting on a personal duel between commanders. With both armies watching, Almus and King Firm stepped forward to settle the battle themselves. There was no more strategy to hide behind, no more formations to adjust, just two leaders and the ground between them. Almus tightened his grip on his spear, raised his shield, and charged. King Firm met him without hesitation, advancing with the confidence of a man who had never lost a fight. From the sidelines, an observer noted that King Firm's superhuman strength was no joke, but one of Almus's allies kept his nerve, muttering that it was terrifying but manageable as long as nobody tried to block him head-on. King Firm taunted Almus mid-clash, asking if he really thought he could win with that kind of power. Almus held back, knowing that if he swung too hard, his spear could snap. He needed a smarter approach. He considered shifting his strategy to generate more force, but before he could act, King Firm pressed forward with a sudden shield bash that caught him off guard. Almus adapted on the fly, weaving between offense and defense, relying on footwork and quick thinking to stay in the fight. The duel became a chess match. Almus reminded himself not to lunge recklessly, knowing that wild attacks were easy to counter. Patience was the real weapon here. King Firm paused and acknowledged Almus's raw strength, but mocked his technique, calling it purely human. That stung. Almus knew he had to find a different angle if he wanted to turn things around. "You have no chance of winning, Almus," King Firm declared, trying to get inside his head. For a split second, doubt crept in, but Almus shoved it aside and swung with everything he had. The desperation of being cornered had pushed him to act on instinct. His weapon broke from the impact. King Firm told him to pick up another weapon. Almus grabbed a sword and felt a surge of confidence. This was his opening. He steadied himself, recognizing that the shorter blade would change the dynamic of the fight entirely. He launched himself back into the duel. He shouted at King Firm that they were going again. With a sword instead of a spear, the range gap had closed. Almus knew King Firm would try to create distance. Almus closed the gap in an instant. He told King Firm that his footwork was the difference, drawing on kendo techniques from his past life. King Firm's frustration was obvious. He had not expected Almus to move that fast, and for the first time, the momentum had shifted. The clash intensified as both warriors hammered at each other's defenses. King Firm let out a roar as Almus pressed him. The king admitted he was no great commander, but boasted that his arm strength was second to none. Their weapons collided again and again, the force of each blow shaking through their bodies. Almus refused to back down. He shouted that there was no way he would die here, his expression fierce with determination. Every strike carried the weight of everything he had built, and everyone counting on him. Almus launched a shield bash of his own, driving King Firm backward. Both of their faces were locked in grim focus. It was no longer just a battle of skill. It was pure will against will. Almus pushed his advantage, his aggression sharpening with every exchange. Around them, soldiers from both sides had stopped fighting just to watch. The entire battlefield held its breath as the duel unfolded. Then, King Firm faltered. A wound caught up with him, and the realization hit. He murmured to himself, wondering if this was where he would die. Almus stood over him, and for a moment, the fury of battle gave way to something heavier. With his last breath, King Firm spoke of his dream to unify the land. He charged Almus with carrying that burden forward. His final wish was simpler and quieter. He asked Almus to make a certain girl happy, the weight of regret clear in his fading voice. Then he was gone. The battlefield fell silent. Almus stood there, processing what had just happened, the gravity of taking another leader's life settling over him. His allies rushed in and surrounded him with praise. They celebrated his victory over King Firm, slapping his back and shouting in triumph. Almus accepted their words, though his mind was still on the fallen king's last request. With King Firm dead, the enemy forces crumbled. The decisive duel had broken their will to fight, and Almus's army marched on the capital without further resistance. The palace fell into their hands with barely any bloodshed. The mood shifted to celebration. His companions congratulated Almus for his leadership and the successful conquest. Someone handed him a victory drink, and for a moment, the exhaustion and tension melted into camaraderie. Then it came out that this territory held a deeply personal meaning. It was Tetra's homeland, the land her family had once ruled before everything fell apart. Almus found Tetra and the others waiting for him. He called out to them with a wide smile, and the relief on their faces was instant. One of his companions told him that no one from their original village had died in the battle. Hearing that lifted a weight off his chest. Almus and Tetra rode through the city together, and the streets erupted around them. Crowds of people cheered and waved, overjoyed at the fall of King Firm's oppressive rule. Both of them were caught off guard by the sheer size of the welcome. An ally urged Almus to wave back, and he did, raising his hand to acknowledge the people who were finally free. Bystanders called out as they passed, marveling at Almus's accomplishments. Someone pointed out that he had taken an enemy general's head, calling it a remarkable feat. Others spoke about how much happier the people would be now that King Firm's tyranny was over. Inside a meeting hall, the discussion turned to the future of the conquered territory. One of the advisors pointed out that Tetra had the strongest claim to rule, given her family's historical connection to the land. But tradition stood in the way. A woman could not inherit directly without marrying into a ruling family. The solution was clear. Almus would marry into Tetra's family line, securing his position while restoring hers. Tetra hesitated, unsure whether the people would actually accept her, but the others reassured her that that the memory of her family's past governance was still strong among the people, and they would welcome her return. Almus's victories in the recent wars would give the Union even more legitimacy and earn the trust of those who did not yet know them. Someone encouraged Tetra to take the leap, telling her that together with Almus, they could surpass even what her father had achieved. Tetra took that in. A quiet resolve settled over her face, and she accepted the plan. She would rule this land alongside Almus, not just as his wife, but as his partner and equal.